101 Secrets of Highly Effective Speakers by Caryl Rae Krannich. Read by Beth McDonald. Edited by Kirk Miller and produced by Elisa Weberman and Alfred Martino. This is a Listen and Live audio production. Chapter 1. Before you begin. Facing the number one fear. Every day, thousands of people present speeches. Many people fear having to present a speech more than any other situation they encounter. Now, this may not sound strange to you, especially if you are scheduled to give a presentation soon and you are already feeling nervous as you anticipate the speech. However, would it surprise you to know that though public speaking is number one on the list of people's fears, number 6 on the list is the fear of death? So what is the worst thing that can happen to you? You approach the podium to deliver your speech with dread and fear mounting, and as you look out over the audience, you drop dead of fright. In an instant, you have dropped from the number 1 fear to the number 6 fear. Yes, I do say this facetiously, but I hope you've at least cracked a smile. People's fears about speaking are very real. These fears are no joking matter if they've kept you awake nights worrying about presentations or kept you from accepting a promotion because you realized that with the new job and title would come increased assignments to make presentations. But if you can smile and relax a bit, perhaps you can be open to the possibility that it doesn't have to be that way. You can, with a little guidance and some positive experiences, actually enjoy the opportunity to share your ideas with an attentive audience. And attentive they will be if you practice the many secrets of successful speakers outlined in this book. 101 Secrets Revealed. The secrets that follow are arranged in sequence. Together they form a series of steps, from start to finish, that will guide you in succession through the preparation and delivery of an effective presentation. Some of the 101 secrets will be new to you, advice you've not heard before. Other secrets will seem more familiar. Some of the secrets may seem so obvious to you that you wonder why they are even listed as secrets. Doesn't everyone know that, you may ask? Over the last 30 years, I have taught, coached, and cajoled thousands of people to become better speakers. Some wanted to learn to be effective speakers. Others had tried to avoid presenting speeches and came only because their boss sent them to the seminar. Let me assure you that every secret shared here is in response to some speaker's real-life success or failure. Resolve to let none of the failures become your failures. Not all of the secrets that follow are exciting. Some are relatively easy to do and will take little time. Others are more difficult or time-consuming. But each is important, and in most cases, one will build upon another. Taken together, they form the steps each of us can take to move from timid to assured, from confusing to lucid, and from filling time to commanding the attention of our listeners as we make effective presentations. Chapter 2. Plan to exceed expectations. 1. Prepare early. In real estate, the watchwords are location, location, location. In public speaking, the watchwords are preparation, preparation, preparation. Most of us tend to procrastinate, at least occasionally. It is so easy to put things off, especially those things we do not look forward to doing. So if a speaking engagement is several weeks off, we can rationalize that we still have plenty of time. But as the day draws closer, panic can soon set in. Don't let this happen to you. Start preparing as soon as you are given or accept a speaking assignment. You have much to do, and to do it right will take time. How much better your speech will be and how much better you will feel if you have taken the time to do it right. Few things are as great a confidence builder as knowing you are prepared. When you are prepared, you have gathered the needed data, determined what is appropriate to the listener's understanding and acceptance levels, organized the ideas so they flow logically, Selected examples and other supports for your ideas that will help clarify your points and make them interesting to your listeners. Developed a great opening that you know will capture the attention of even the daydreamers in your audience. Checked out the room where you will be speaking. Requested any feasible changes you wish in the setup of the room. If you're prepared, you are confident that you really know the material you plan to share with your audience. You're familiar with it because you have spent so much time with it, selecting and organizing the ideas that will best convey your message to your listeners. If you have waited until a few days before your presentation to begin to prepare, or worse yet, the day before, no doubt you will be apprehensive, and with good reason. The normal butterflies you feel at getting up to make a presentation are intensified by the realization that you are not well prepared, and now there is not enough time to engage in more than a superficial attempt. Winging it will come across as just that. Both you and the audience will feel uncomfortable. Like retirement planning, it is never too early to start preparing for your presentation. So start preparing right away. It is the first step toward becoming an effective speaker. 2. Plan to be effective. Boiled down to its essence, there are 3 possible outcomes to a presentation. 1. It is irrelevant. People attend, perhaps they listen, or they may sit politely and only appear to listen. They leave and never give another thought to the message. 2. It is evaluated as good or poor. As the audience leaves the room, they comment on what a good speech it was. They enjoyed it. It was interesting. Or it was boring. They didn't enjoy it. 3. It is effective. Now certainly you would be pleased, perhaps overjoyed, to hear what a great speaker your audience thought you were and how much they enjoyed your presentation. Nothing wrong in that. But if that's all there is, to paraphrase an old song line, you've come up short. You need to plan to be effective. To be effective means your message has created change in your listeners. Your message has added to their knowledge, or you have convinced them to believe or accept an idea, or you have persuaded them to act on something. If your goal was for listeners to understand the advantages versus disadvantages of the company's new health plan, and most of the audience leave your presentation with that understanding, your presentation was effective. If you want your audience to accept that the new health plan offers them better benefits than did the old company plan, do they now accept this? If they do, you are an effective speaker. If you want your listeners to stop smoking, do they? Or if you want them to buckle up every time they get in a car, do they? You are an effective speaker if your listeners understand the concept, accept the premise, or engage in the behavior you are promoting. Perhaps the difference between what is meant by good versus effective was best summed up by Adlai Stevenson, who observed, "When Cicero finished an oration, the people would say, 'How well he spoke.' But when Demosthenes finished speaking, the people would say, 'Let us march.'" A good speech results from the speaker's selection, organization, and presentation of ideas. An attention-getting introduction. Main points that are well supported, developed, and organized. A conclusion that provides a summary and then hits the listeners with a memorable impact statement. A delivery that is dynamic and easy to listen to. These are all elements that, if done well, result in a good speech. An effective speech results from the thorough analysis of the audience that allows the speaker to focus on the needs of this audience and to select ideas and supports that will be appropriate for this particular audience. If you internalize the secrets throughout this book, you can become a speaker that is both good and effective. Good plus effective equals a successful speech. Your listeners will say, "How well he spoke," followed by, "Let us march." 3. Determine your goal. We all want to take shortcuts. If there is a faster or easier way, we try to find it. But in taking what we perceive to be shortcuts, we sometimes short-circuit the process instead. The result is that we actually spend more time than if we had done it right to begin with, or we miss our goal entirely. You might think that asking you to determine your goal as an early part of your preparation process is overly simplistic and hardly a secret to effective speaking. If so, you have not heard the speeches that I have heard, nor asked the presenters following the speech what their goal had been. Your jaw might drop if you were to watch these speakers hem and haw as they attempt to articulate a goal for the speech they just presented. So the lack of a clear focus and goal in the speaker's mind results in confusion and lack of clarity in the message. These speeches often wind up being a stream of consciousness, a string of thoughts related to the topic of the speech and tied together one after another. What is lacking is a clear main idea, development of the idea, and any hint of how we, the listeners, might be changed by these ideas. We come away confused rather than informed, convinced, or ready for action. So take some time to determine your goal. It should not be simply to fill time. You must have a message you believe in, one you believe your listeners must hear, one you believe can make a difference in their lives. You may wish to provide information on the relative benefits of the various pension plans they may select from. You may wish to convince them a new type of dental filling is superior to amalgam fillings, or you may wish to sell them on the new advertising campaign you've developed. Your goal does not have to be earth-shaking, but you need to have a goal in mind. You need to believe in it, and your listeners need to feel it is important to them. If you can finish the sentence, "I want my listeners to," fairly concisely, you have a goal statement, and you are ready to start planning your presentation. No matter how good your idea, if it doesn't get through or doesn't get sold, you've not been effective. Effective speakers have a clear goal before they begin other steps in speech preparation. Constantly refer back to your goal as you prepare. It will keep you on target. 4. Analyze the audience. This step is frequently overlooked by speakers who try to shortcut the process. But effective speakers make the effort. Every communication situation involves 4 elements: speaker, audience, occasion situation in which the communication occurs, message itself. An analysis of the speaker, audience, and situation must be taken into consideration in order to know how to best formulate the message, in this case, your speech. If a speech is to be given to several different audiences and is to be its most effective, it should be modified somewhat to fit each audience. You can put together a good speech and give it over and over again to many different audiences, and it will still be good. But it may be only an effective speech, that is, your listeners understand the message or do what you persuade them to do for one of those audiences. As you analyze your expected audience, you should address the following considerations. How large is the audience? What will be the ages of your listeners? What is the male to female ratio in the audience? How much education do your listeners have? What do your listeners already know about your topic? What are your listeners' attitudes toward your topic, your stance? How open to new ideas will your listeners be? What are the listeners' relationships to you, the speaker? What are the relationships of audience members to each other? What are the listeners' attitudes toward you? Do listeners have a choice in attending? Not all of these questions are pertinent to every speech, and every consideration pertinent to your speech may not be listed here. Go through the list and concern yourself with those that are pertinent and add any additional areas you need to consider. The size of the audience will determine the number of handouts for your audience. Also, many speakers find it helps to prepare themselves mentally for a particular size crowd. Listeners' ages often will be immaterial. However, if you appear youthful and will be speaking to an older crowd about retirement planning, you would be well advised to try to boost your credibility at the beginning of your talk. No matter how great a speaker, you will initially encounter an "he looks young enough to be my grandson, what can he teach me?" attitude. Besides, if you expect a homogeneous group of a certain age bracket, you can tailor your examples to that age group. Male to female ratio of listeners won't make any difference to how you organize and support some topics, but can to others. The educational level of listeners helps you gauge style and language, whereas their information level will be your guide as to how basic you need to tailor your comments on the topic. Understanding listeners' initial attitudes and receptiveness to your viewpoint will help you to both select your supports and organize your thoughts to lead them to your premise. The relationship of listeners to each other, or to the speaker, may influence how or whether they interact with each other as well as the speaker. Are listeners in attendance by choice? Audience members who are required to attend a session can be reluctant, even hostile listeners. Effective speakers know and adapt their material to their audience. 5. Consider the situation. Consider Tricia, who prepared her speech and arrived for her speaking engagement to find she was one of several speakers on the program that evening. It was bad enough that Tricia faced a not-so-fresh audience following 2 speakers that preceded her. Worse yet, the speaker just prior to her presented much of the same material Tricia was prepared to present in her speech. Or what about Ted, who arrived to give his speech armed with several carousels of slides and found that the electrical outlet was on the opposite side of the room and he had no extension cord? Who would want to have been Selena, who talked for an hour to a group who expected no more than a 20-minute presentation? It is never too early to check out the setting in which you will be speaking. Not only can you prepare for the situation you will encounter, if what you find is not to your liking, you may be able to change the setup of the room, or even change to another location, if you identify the problem early enough. Things to check on that will help guide you as you prepare your speech include: what is the size and physical setup of the room? If the room is very large, is there a microphone? Is there a lectern? Is the lectern on a raised platform or on a stage? What are the lighting choices? Is the entire room lit evenly, or will you be on a stage that is brightly lit while the audience sits with house lights dim? Where are electrical outlets located? What is the availability of audio-visual equipment? What distractions are there likely to be? Will there be noise from outside, across the hall, or the space on the other side of the room divider? Can the seating be arranged to suit your presentation? Can the room temperature be regulated? Don't limit yourself to consideration of the elements suggested. Think about speeches you have given in the past, as well as speeches for which you have been in the audience. What changes to the physical setting might have had a positive impact on the outcome? There are other factors to be aware of related to the situation beyond elements of the physical setting. The time of day. Will the audience be fresh, tired, or anxious to get out to meet the afternoon carpool? Other speakers sharing the podium. If there are other speakers, will you be the first speaker, in the middle, or the last to present? What will be their focus and their points of view? You certainly will have a hard time keeping listeners' attention if you are repeating half of the prior speaker's talk. If a speaker's point of view is different than yours, you may wish to deal with the differences head-on. Provide the audience with the reasons your point of view is more acceptable. Time limits. What are the time limits? Always expect time limits. If you exceed them, your audience will head for the nearest mental exit. Effective speakers keep situational constraints in mind as they prepare. 6. Highlight your strengths. And 7. Minimize your weaknesses. You have determined what you can about your audience and the situation. Now, it's time to take a hard look at yourself, the speaker, from the perspective of the listeners. How do these listeners perceive you? Even if they have never laid eyes on you before, they do have preconceived notions about you, about your expertise, your honesty, your position on the issue, your willingness to defend your position. These opinions may have been formed through media coverage of you, or may be the result of mindless gossip. Their opinions may not be based in fact. But remember, a person's perception of reality is reality to that person. So to be an effective speaker, you must step out of your own perspective and try to look at how the other person, your listener, perceives the situation. You must find where your listeners' heads are and begin there to enhance your strengths and minimize your weaknesses as they will be perceived by the audience. For example, do you look young but have a lot of experience? Attire yourself to look professional, speak with authority, and allude to your strongest related accomplishments. I recall a young woman in attendance at one of my seminars. She shared with the rest of the participants that her boss had sent her because she just didn't come across with authority when she made presentations. Some obvious things acting against her were: she was petite, she was youthful in appearance, she was dressed casually and youthfully, she hardly made eye contact with the audience, looking mostly at the lectern. She did not project her voice, and even in a small room we had to strain to hear her. She spoke with excessive ahs and ums, which made her seem tentative and unsure of herself. She stood teetering back and forth behind the lectern. Her shoulders were hunched forward and inward, and her body screamed submission. What things can she modify, and what can she not change? She will remain petite and, for now, young. These attributes are givens. But she can dress to give herself a look of authority, professionalism, and competence that will take the edge off her youth. She learned to look at her audience and engage each of them as her eyes scanned the room. When she projected her voice, not only could we hear her more easily and hence paid better attention, but she sounded authoritative and hence more credible as well. She came across as more confident as she lessened the number of vocalized pauses. She learned to plant her weight evenly on both feet and stand behind the lectern, pulling herself up as tall as her height would permit. She alluded to her experience where appropriate. When she left the seminar, she was well on her way to appearing much more confident and competent when she spoke. Consider how your audience will perceive you and work to modify where you can those things that will enhance your presentation and further the progress toward your goal. 8. Sleuth the rest of the program. With what and whom will you be sharing the program? Is there a business meeting after which you are the featured speaker? Are there other speakers? Find out how long the other parts of the program are scheduled to take, as well as the time limits placed on you. Don't let anyone tell you, take as much time as you need. There is no such thing. Your audience will have expectations based on previous sessions. If you exceed the time expected, your listeners will take a mental exit. If there are other speakers, try to talk with each one prior to finalizing your speech. What are the others' focus? Their stand on any issues? How long does each plan to speak? What is the speaking order? If you are the final speaker for the evening, expect that you will be late getting started. Most of the previous speakers will have run over their allotted time, and before you even begin, your audience is tired. Plan ahead of time to limit the length of your remarks. Your audience will be grateful and more attentive. and try to inject a bit of humor as you begin, assuming it is appropriate to the situation. You're familiar with the expression, "If anything can go wrong, it probably will"? Effective speakers try to anticipate what could go wrong and prepare contingency plans. Chapter 3. Build your body, your speech body. 9. Gather information. Where do you start? Assuming that you are an expert on the subject of your speech, and this is why you've been selected to speak on this topic, you'll find that you have much of the information you'll use in your head. Start there. Because this is an area with which you are familiar, you will probably know individuals who also have expertise related to your topic. You may wish to contact some of them for the up-to-date or specialized information. Of course, there are also printed materials that you will be familiar with, or that the sources you contact will point you toward. Printed data that is available at your office, local library, or on the World Wide Web are fine. Use them. But don't overlook what is often your richest source of information: your personal contacts. 10. Limit your time. You are sitting in the audience listening to a speech. Your expectation was that this would take about 15 to 20 minutes of your time. Mentally, this time frame is what you are prepared for. However, the speaker has been droning on for over 40 minutes and shows no sign that he is about to conclude. As you look around, you can tell that the rest of the audience is as uncomfortable as you. Their body language says it all. What do? Do you get up and leave the room? Probably not, even though you might like to. Most of us will stay, even if it is a supreme test of our endurance. We won't physically leave the room, but we will take a mental exit. Our body remains, but our mind has left. Studies conducted by social psychologists show that 20 minutes is the maximum time the average adult can remain attentive to a speaker. The admonition to speakers over the ages has been, leave your audience wanting more. Not bad advice, though perhaps easier said than done. Determine your listeners' time limits and resolve to finish sooner rather than later. No matter how important, no matter how voluminous your information, conclude well within the expected time limits. After all, what your listeners don't hear has no impact on them. If they've taken a mental exit, they will not hear your message, no matter how important. Effective speakers do not impose themselves on the minds of their listeners for longer than the posterior can bear. 11. Limit your focus. The secret to limiting your time is to limit your focus. Of course, it would be difficult to share with your audience everything you know about a topic in limited time, but then they don't want to hear everything you know, and it would most likely turn out to be a rambling stream of consciousness anyway. Remember secret number 3. Determine your goal. If you have concisely stated your goal, you have taken the first step to limiting your focus. If you have followed secret number 4 and analyzed your audience, you have further limited your focus by determining what your listeners will need to hear. Consider time constraints as you determine your main points and develop your ideas. At this point, you may further limit your focus if necessary to fit into the time available. 12. Develop the speech body first. Most speeches consist of 3 parts: introduction, body, conclusion. In simplest terms, the introduction should gain your listeners' attention and orient them to the focus of your speech. The body, sometimes referred to as the discussion section, sets forth the main ideas and develops or supports the main ideas of your speech. The conclusion briefly reviews the main ideas and imparts a statement of impact. You will deliver the parts in that order: introduction, body, and conclusion. But don't prepare them in that order. One of the fastest ways to develop speechwriter's block is to begin by preparing your introduction. Begin by preparing the body of your speech. The body is the heart of your speech, the main ideas and their development. It will be easier for you to prepare the speech body first. Once you finish preparing the body, you will know exactly what the speech message is. 13. Determine your main points. Once you have followed the advice in secret number 3, determine your goal, you have a specific idea what you want your listeners to understand, believe, or do after they've heard your speech. As you completed the task suggested in secret number 4, analyze the audience, you focused on specific attributes of your listeners as they relate to the topic of your speech, the setting of the presentation, and you, the speaker. Put together the information you have from following secrets number 3 and number 4, and you should be able to articulate your main points. What do your listeners need to move from where they are now, your audience analysis should indicate where they stand, to where you want them to be, your goal statement. What your listeners need, either to understand your message or be persuaded, should determine your main points. Each main point should help move your listeners toward your goal. Focus is important. Don't let yourself get waylaid going off on tangents. Remember, you are not filling time. You are attempting to help your listeners move from one point to another. Each main idea should support this goal. After bounty hunters burst into the wrong house and killed 2 innocent people in Arizona, a speaker selected this goal and identified 2 main ideas. Goal statement. To convince listeners that bounty hunters should be licensed to raise their competence and level of professionalism. Main idea 1. In order to obtain a license to become a bounty hunter, the applicant must undergo a thorough background check for criminal history and mental stability. Main idea 2. In order to obtain a license to become a bounty hunter, the applicant must pass a test covering the laws that govern the identification of and apprehension of those who have skipped bail. The most common mistake beginning speakers make is to select too many main points. You have limited time. You must limit the ideas you present. 3 main points are plenty for most speeches. Each one of the main points must be developed with supporting materials, and to develop your ideas fully will take time. Take, for example, a 10-minute speech in which you plan to present 3 main points. If you spend 1 minute each on your introduction and conclusion, you only have just over 2.5 minutes to develop each of your 3 points. That is bare bones. Those bones need flesh, and developing that flesh, the subject of the next few secrets, takes time and a variety of supports, such as quotations, statistics, examples, and comparisons. 14. Use supporting materials liberally. Build credibility. Just because you make a statement, you can't expect that your listeners will accept it as fact, nor can you necessarily expect that they will understand it. Your main ideas must be amplified and supported in order to be understood or accepted. As you develop your main ideas, you help your listeners move from their present understanding or acceptance of your main thesis to where you hope they will be when you conclude your remarks. Supporting materials help a speaker add interest, clarify a point, prove a point, make points memorable, and build credibility. Hence, the speaker's choice of supporting materials is made on the basis of his analysis of the audience. Obviously, if my listeners are interested in what I say, they will be more attentive. That increased level of attention gives me a better opportunity to inform or persuade them. What will add interest for this audience? What do my listeners need to understand or to accept my proposition? How can I make the ideas I present truly memorable. The following 9 secrets present the most frequently used forms and methods for supporting your main ideas in the body of a speech. Effective speakers enhance their ideas and build their credibility by using a variety of supporting materials, and they use them liberally. 15. Use quotations, testimony. If someone has said what you want to say better than you ever could, use quotations to support a main idea in your talk. Go ahead and use the great way someone else made the point, but give credit to the source so you will not be accused of plagiarism. Or you may choose to use a quotation because you believe the source itself will be a highly credible one to this audience, and the source will add weight to the ideas you present. Sources may be individuals, such as a prominent scientist. A source could be a formal group of people, such as the AMA, the American Medical Association. A source could be a publication, such as the New England Journal of Medicine. You may have several sources available to you for essentially the same information, and you must select the ones you will credit. Your audience analysis should help you choose. As you cite the results of an extended medical study, you may have choices. Do you give credit by citing the researcher by name, or do you credit the New England Journal of Medicine, where the research results were published? To a group of laymen with no knowledge of the medical research community, you would probably allude to the published results and the journal, knowing that even people with no medical training have heard of it and know it is held in high regard. However, for a speech directed at persons in the medical community who would be familiar with the name and work of an eminent scientist, you would probably want to cite the researcher by name. Of course, you could decide to attribute both the researcher and the journal for yet another audience. When presenting quotations, it is not necessary to preface with quote and follow it with unquote. It is much smoother to indicate a quote to the audience by prefacing with according to, or following the quote with, those were the words of. Although many speakers build collections of quotations as they come across items that they believe they might use in the future, you will probably find plenty of material for use as quotations as you do research for your speech. There are also books of quotations available in your library as well as bookstores. Quotations add authority to your speech, show that there are others, many of them experts, who share your point of view, as well as add interest and make points memorable. 16. Use statistics. Numbers can be useful to clarify an idea, make an idea more meaningful, communicate information more precisely, present information more powerfully, believably, and hence more convincingly. But numbers by themselves don't necessarily clarify. If you talk about an area of 6,000 square miles, what meaning will this have to the average listener? But if you compare this figure to something more familiar to the audience, your support can add both precision and clarity. Consider a student at Penn State from Kuwait, who in a talk about his home country made the following statement. Kuwait is a small country in size. In fact, Kuwait is made up of only 6,000 square miles. That's about the size of Rhode Island and Connecticut combined. By comparing the number of square miles with the area of 2 states his listeners were familiar with, he made the size of Kuwait much more meaningful to his audience. The following example shows how helping an audience to visualize what you are talking about can make an idea immensely powerful. Most of us, if asked the difference between $1 million and $1 trillion, would be hard put to offer a good answer. Listen to the next quotation taken from President Reagan's speech made to a joint session of Congress about his first budget. A few weeks ago, I called such a figure, $1 trillion, incomprehensible. I've been trying to think of a way to illustrate how big it really is. The best I could come up with is to say that a stack of $1,000 bills in your hand only 4 inches high would make you a millionaire. $1 trillion would be a stack of $1,000 bills 76 miles high. I'll wager that most listeners, even members of Congress, were stunned. I certainly was. Granted, you don't have access to the speechwriters of the president who will research and formulate impactful supports like Reagan's, but if you keep your goal in mind, know your audience, and think creatively, you too can formulate supports that will increase your effectiveness. 17. Use examples. Examples, whether detailed illustrations or short specific instances, pique listeners' interest. An example may be actual or hypothetical. Consider the following example in which the speaker tries to exhort the audience to imagine a situation most have never actually encountered. How can we understand what is happening in Bosnia? Many of us have never lived in a war zone. Oh yes, we hear about wars in far-off lands on the evening news, but we've not gone off to a distant land to fight a war, nor have we lived in a place where war was raging all around us. A place where, when we go to bed at night, we can't shut out the sounds of bombs falling, of sirens blaring, of shots fired, or of people screaming. We've not lived in a place where we wake in the morning and find our best friend's body laying face down in the street outside our door. The painful realities of war are impossible to imagine if our closest contact is the 6 o'clock news. 18. Tell stories. Stories tell of events that have happened to people. Stories personalize a message, as listeners can identify with the people and the situations you relate. If you can relate an incident that actually happened to you and that furthers your goal to inform or persuade, that's a plus. If you can tell a story about a relative or a friend, that too seems personal because you are close to the source. Or a story may involve others whom the speaker has only read or heard about, but the audience can still relate to the real people and events involved. 19. Use comparisons and contrasts. Sometimes listeners can understand or accept a concept better if the speaker focuses on similarities or dissimilarities between things, concepts, processes, people, or places. A comparison presents characteristics, features, or qualities which are similar. It may show listeners a relationship between something familiar and something unfamiliar. It may show a relationship which is a surprise. A recent televised Hollywood news clip mentioned that a motion picture was being filmed on a glacier near Juneau, Alaska. The Mendenhall Glacier's ice field covers an area larger than the state of Rhode Island. Comparing the size of the glacier to the area of Rhode Island made the magnitude of the glacier meaningful to an audience who had never seen a glacier. Contrasts can be used to show differences between things, concepts, processes, people, or places. In a speech focused on trying to get the audience to buckle their seatbelts, Beth contrasted the cost in lives as well as money lost due to incidents of crime versus automobile accidents. A murder occurs every 22 minutes. Someone dies in an automobile crash every 14 minutes. An aggravated assault occurs every 30 seconds. Someone is injured in a car crash every 11 seconds. Violent crimes cost society $14 billion a year. Traffic crashes cost society $74 billion a year. 20. Demonstrate. Some ideas are made understandable by actually demonstrating how to do it or what it looks like. A speaker whose goal is to help listeners save lives by learning how to administer CPR on a victim who has stopped breathing may explain the process but he will certainly also choose to demonstrate how to administer CPR as a part of his speech. 21. Define unfamiliar terms. Your audience analysis should indicate whether you will be using words or acronyms unfamiliar to your audience. It's a good idea when using an acronym for the first time in a speech to follow it with an indication of what the letters stand for. This morning, I'll be discussing the new initiatives underway at DOT, the Department of Transportation, to promote the use of seatbelts by drivers as well as all the passengers in their car, whether seated in the front or back seats. From this point on, for most audiences, the speaker may use this acronym freely. It can become confusing if the speaker uses too many acronyms that the audience is unfamiliar with, as it is hard to remember what so many new terms stand for. Definitions are especially useful when different meanings are possible, or you are using a word in a different way than the norm. Operational definitions help you and your listeners stay focused on the way you will use certain words or phrases. What does a speaker mean by gun control? To one person, it may mean taking gun ownership away from private citizens, while to another, it may mean applying for a permit to own a gun with a 5-day waiting period. 22. Use visual aids effectively. Another method to enhance your presentation is to show an idea. Visuals allow listeners to see as well as hear your message. As a method of support, visuals help listeners' understanding and acceptance. Visual aids strengthen a speech in all the same ways as the forms of support we have looked at thus far. Visuals help the speaker add interest, clarify a point, prove a point, emphasize a point, make ideas memorable. Visuals may be used as a method to emphasize a strong quotation, a significant statistic, an excellent example, a striking comparison, or an important definition. A demonstration itself becomes a visual. Visuals may be a few words written on a flip chart or a chalkboard, ideas presented using an overhead projector, photos or slides to enhance your message, or state-of-the-art computer-generated and interactive aids. If there is a visual that will help your audience understand your message, accept your premise, or act on your challenge, use it. If you can devise a visual that will keep your listeners' attention or help them recall your message later, use it. But there is no rule that says every speech must have a visual. The wrong visual can be a distraction and a detriment to a speech. Visuals used properly can enhance your presentation, but using them effectively means observing certain rules, or they can become a distraction. Guidelines for presentation of visual aids. 1. Show visuals only when you are talking about them. If a visual is in view of your listener before you refer to it, or after you have finished talking about it, your audience will be distracted. You want your listeners to direct their attention toward you rather than the visual, except when you are using it to make your point. 2. Be certain visuals are of sufficient size and are placed so that everyone in the audience can see them. If you select visuals that some listeners cannot see, no matter how great they are, you have lost the listeners who are unable to see them. They know they are missing out on something, and after straining to see and finding they cannot, they will give up and take a mental exit. 3. Talk to your audience, not your visual. Face your listeners and direct your comments to them. Glance at your visual briefly if you wish to point to it, but once you've found your place, focus your attention back on your audience. 4. Be prepared for equipment breakdown if you are using mechanical or electrical equipment. You recall Murphy's Law. If anything can go wrong, it probably will. Anticipate what problems could occur and carry backups. Using anything electrical? Make sure you have an extension cord. Using an overhead projector? Go prepared with an extra backup bulb. Use visuals to enhance your speech, but be prepared so that if it were necessary, you could deliver your presentation without them. 5. Don't overdo. The purpose of visuals is clarity and emphasis. If overused, everything and hence nothing becomes emphasized. 6. Recognize that anything put in the hands of the listeners or passed around the audience is a distraction. Anything put in your listeners' hands will focus their attention on it and away from you. Consider carefully whether what the visuals add to your listeners' understanding will offset the distraction it will create. The decision is yours. You must decide what visuals, if any, will help your listeners understand, accept, or do what you espouse. 23. Restate ideas in a variety of ways. Restatement is the art of being redundant without being repetitious. To restate is not to merely repeat the same thing in the same way. To restate is to find different ways of communicating a message. Using a variety of types of support, an example, a quotation, a comparison with a statistic, to develop an idea affords a likelihood that more of our listeners will understand or embrace our ideas. Restatement gives us a chance to catch a listener's attention with our second support, if he has taken a mental break when we mentioned the first. Restatement recognizes the different experiences and needs of various listeners. What is relevant for one may have little meaning for another. According to Waldo W. Braden, we communicate not by what we say, but by what listeners hear. By saying things in a variety of ways, it is likely that a wider part of our audience will hear our message in a way that is meaningful to them. 24. Organize ideas for easy understanding. Effective speakers recognize the importance of organization. You've got an important goal, a message you want your listeners to understand, believe, or act on. You have good main points, and you've selected great supports to develop your ideas. Now, organize your message clearly, and it's far more likely that your listeners will understand your message, accept your message, remember your message, and be interested in your message. The arrangement you select will depend on your goal, your topic, and your audience. Sound familiar? It's back to your audience analysis to determine what your listeners need in order to follow your ideas. Also, some arrangements will work better for certain topics than for others. Some methods of organization are great for speeches to inform, but weak for a persuasive goal. The following secrets will divulge 4 of the most useful formats for organizing informational speeches and 4 additional methods for constructing persuasive speeches. 25. Put your ideas in sequential order. Some speeches lend themselves to a chronological or sequential ordering. If you're talking about how to do something, especially the steps to take, a sequential ordering is a natural. If your focus is on an historical event or a process, choose a chronological ordering of ideas. These would be ideal formats for topics like an analysis of the events leading up to the War of 1812, tracing the invention of the airplane, tracing the progress of a bill through Congress. You may even decide to present your ideas in a reverse chronological order, selecting the most recent thing and moving backward in time. If you are introducing a speaker, for example, you may wish to initially mention her present position and then move backward as you highlight her past accomplishments. A sequential order is especially useful for speeches to inform. 26. Put your ideas in spatial order. If your topic deals with the physical arrangement of things or shows the relationship of parts to the whole, ordering your message according to space considerations may be a perfect fit. Spatial order might showcase your message if you are trying to show the layout of exhibits in the Louvre Museum in Paris, the flow of passengers from the metro to ticketing to the departure gate at the new airport, the best route from San Francisco to Albuquerque. The spatial arrangement is also useful for speeches designed to inform. 27. Organize your ideas by category. This method of arranging ideas is sometimes called classification or topic order. It is a friend of the speaker with an informative goal because it is a great catch-all category. If you cannot organize your speech any other way, this will probably work for you. Some topics just naturally fall into this format. For example, in talking about the federal government, you could easily divide your talk by discussing the three branches: the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. 28. Discuss a problem and its solution. This method can be used whether your goal is to inform or persuade. You need to first establish the scope of the problem. Go back to your audience analysis to determine whether your listeners are aware of the scope or severity of the problem. Operationally, define the problem, if necessary, and stress its importance by describing the severity or impact of the problem. Any solution you present will involve expenditures, either of people's time or money. To be convinced to accept any solution, listeners must be first convinced there is a significant problem that needs solving. Problems are perceived to be significant if a large number of people are impacted, or if the impact is very severe on those affected. Don't move too rapidly from a discussion of the problem to your presentation of solutions. The second step is to present several solutions if your goal is to inform. Discuss each proposed solution in order that your listeners take with them an awareness of the choices and pros and cons of each. If your goal is to persuade, you will probably spend most of your time on the one solution you are promoting and build supports as to why it is the best solution. You may choose to mention the other solutions competing for acceptance in order to explain why those are inferior to the solution you are advocating. 29. Provide listeners a statement of reasons. This method is appropriate when your goal is to persuade and you believe your audience essentially agrees with your point of view or it is undecided about the issue. The method is a form of the category order in which each main point is a reason justifying your goal statement. Take, for example, the issue of refinancing home mortgages during a period of low interest rates. Your goal statement is to convince my listeners to refinance now before interest rates go higher. This statement serves as the basis for organizing the main ideas of a speech to persuade. You can use the problem solution or any of the remaining four methods for organizing this speech. For example, your goal is, I want my listeners to agree that they should refinance their home mortgages with ABC Mortgage now. Your three main points could be, 1. If your fixed 30-year mortgage rate is above 8.5%, you can save thousands of dollars given current low interest rates. 2. You can refinance your present mortgage with little or no cash and immediately lower your monthly payments. 3. The refinancing process is quick and easy. You can begin the refinancing process tomorrow and begin paying the lower rate with your next mortgage payment. Notice that each main point is a reason why the listeners should refinance now. 30. Provide listeners with comparative advantages. This method outlines reasons why it is most advantageous to do what the speaker proposes. This method works especially well when you know many members of your audience agree with your arguments. The arguments presented usually emphasize why it is better to take action according to the speaker's plan. Goal: I want my listeners to agree that they should refinance their home mortgages with ABC Mortgage now. 1. ABC Mortgage offers a fixed 30-year interest rate of 6.5%, lower than any other company. 2. A special refinancing package available this month will eliminate costly points and other standard loan processing fees charged by other companies. 3. ABC Mortgage guarantees a 24-hour response to your loan application, the fastest in the business. Notice that each reason states what the listener should agree with or do in terms of its advantage over the other options. 31. Use the criteria satisfaction method. This method attempts to build a consensus amongst members of a somewhat hostile audience. The approach initially tries to get individuals to agree to the speaker's points. Goal: I want my listeners to agree that they should refinance their home mortgages with ABC Mortgage now. 1. As homeowners, we all want to know when we sign for our mortgage that we have the best deal possible. A. We all want to pay the lowest interest rate. B. We all want to put up as little cash as possible at settlement. C. We all want an application process that is quick and easy. The speaker has made statements he believes his listeners will agree with. He believes they all want the lowest rate possible and will say a mental yes. He believes they will agree they want to pay as little cash as possible on the deal and would like an easy application process. Once he has their yes response, he moves on and indicates how his company's mortgage package meets each of the goals the listeners have already agreed they favor. 2. ABC Mortgage is offering the best deal in today's marketplace. A. ABC Mortgage's fixed 30-year 6.5% rate is the lowest available. B. With ABC Mortgage, you need little or no cash at settlement. C. ABC Mortgage's application process is quick and easy to complete. This can be a very effective method with audiences initially in disagreement with the speaker's goal. 32. Use the negative method. This method is viable for hostile audiences to persuade them to agree with the speaker's arguments. Here you show that the alternatives available to your listeners are less advantageous to them than the proposal you are advocating. Goal: I want my listeners to agree that they should refinance their home mortgages with ABC Mortgage now. 1. Keeping your present mortgage at over 8.5% is a poor financial strategy. 2. Waiting for interest rates to go lower than our 6.5% offer is misplaced optimism. 3. Taking out a variable rate mortgage is equivalent to playing Russian roulette with your financial future. 4. Refinancing with a fixed 30-year mortgage at 6.5% with ABC Mortgage is the only choice of wise money managers. Notice how the speaker points out that each of the 3 other options the audience may consider are not good choices. Their best alternative is to do what the speaker advocates. Chapter 4. Command attention. Your introduction sets the tone. The first words out of every speaker's mouth should be a well-planned attempt to gain listeners' attention. What a lost opportunity if the first sentence is, "Can everyone hear me?" or "Today I'm going to talk about..." These are ho-hum rather than lend me your ears beginnings. Once your listeners take a mental exit, it is difficult to get them back in the room. The rest of the speech, no matter how strong, will be an uphill struggle to regain their attention. However, if you start strong and capture attention at the beginning, you have an excellent chance of keeping listeners with you if your message is well adapted to your audience. In addition to grabbing attention, your introduction must relate to your speech topic so you can smoothly transition to your message. The introduction attempts to gain attention, but then focuses that attention on the theme of the speech. Your first goal is to reach out and capture your listener's attention. So if, today I'm going to talk about, is dull, what are better ways to begin? 33. Refer to the subject or occasion. If there is anything special about the occasion, it marks the 35th anniversary of the Peace Corps, or celebrates the successful completion of the fundraising drive for the National Symphony, you may choose to begin your speech by alluding to the occasion itself. It is an opportunity to build cohesion within the group and your rapport with a group, especially if you are an outsider, as you congratulate them on their fine work or mark the milestone. 34. Begin with a powerful quotation. A quotation used in the body of the speech is selected for its support. A quotation used to begin should be selected for its impact. The quotation or the source should be sufficient to pique listeners' interest. Or, the fact that the audience does not know initially that it is a quote may be an attention grabber in itself. Take, for example, the 18-year-old college student who approached the lectern and began saying, "I have today signed an executive order providing for the establishment of a Peace Corps on a temporary pilot basis. I am also sending to Congress a message proposing authorization of a permanent Peace Corps. This Corps will be a pool of trained American men and women sent overseas by the U.S. government or through private institutions and organizations to help foreign countries meet their urgent needs for skilled manpower." These were the words of President John F. Kennedy on March 1, 1961, when he proposed the Peace Corps. That this was a quote was not initially revealed to the listeners. Imagine the audience looking at this 18-year-old and wondering, what does he mean? He has signed an executive order? What does he mean when he says he recommends to Congress? Who does he think he is? It got listeners' attention, as it was intended to do, and provided the segue to an informative talk about the Peace Corps. 35. Ask a rhetorical question. If a rhetorical question is posed and listeners hear it, they almost certainly will answer it, to themselves. They have no choice. As listeners respond to themselves, they become less passive listeners. As they become more active participants in the communication, their attention is focused on your message. A rhetorical question is posed for thought and internal response. The speaker neither expects hands to be raised nor answers to be shouted out. The speaker may pose one or a series of questions. Look at the following introduction, which uses a series of questions to gain attention. Did you know when you got up this morning and stood naked ready to step into the shower, you were already wearing 7 to 10 of your very best colors? When you dressed, did you attire yourself to complement and enhance those body colors or to overpower them? Do you look best in a pure white blouse or shirt, or is a slightly creamy white more flattering? Can you wear your white with a navy suit and look authoritative and powerful, or does that much contrast overpower you? These are questions you may have never even considered, yet alone answered. By the time you leave here today, you will be able to answer these and many other questions that relate to your very best look for both business and social occasions. The speaker then delivered a speech demonstrating how each person could best select and combine their colors to enhance their own natural coloring using the Color One system. Note that these are rhetorical questions posed to the audience with the intention that the listeners will respond internally. If ever you consider asking questions to which you want the audience members to make an actual response, especially early in your speech, consider again. First, you lose control of the direction and focus. A question posed by an audience member may take off on a tangent you neither want nor are prepared to follow. Second, even if you are able to refocus in the direction you wish to take your listeners, it will have taken precious time. 36. Make a startling statement. You may vie for your listeners' attention by beginning your speech with a statement that will startle them. If they hear you, they cannot help but listen to hear what will come next. Consider the following first line to open a speech to employees or to stockholders in which the speaker's purpose is to tout the growth and accomplishments of the firm. Today we just shipped the 6 millionth book out our door. A speaker began a speech on conversation by juxtaposing the following 2 short sentences. One tree can make 1,000,000 matches, but one match can destroy 1,000,000 trees. A startling statement is meant to grab the listener's attention. If the listeners hear the statement, they will be compelled to perk up their ears to see what this means for them. Obviously, the speaker must be able to make the connection between the startling statement and the thrust of the speech. 37. Keep listeners in suspense. Entice your listeners by briefly keeping them in suspense. You are providing a hook for your listeners as they try to guess what you are leading up to. You must keep the use of suspense short. If you keep listeners in suspense too long, you will lose, not heighten, their interest. First, let's look at an example that most listeners were probably able to guess before the speaker told them. It has 88 keys, but no locks. 230 strings, but you couldn't fly a kite with it. 20 million people play it, but it isn't a game. It's the piano, America's most popular musical instrument. The National Piano Foundation has designated September as National Piano Month. So this seems an appropriate time for me to... Not difficult. Most listeners anticipated what was being referred to, but it was intriguing and caught their attention. 38. Engage listeners with a vivid illustration. Everyone enjoys a good story well told. You can make it personal. Your audience will enjoy hearing about something that happened to you, or you can tell a story about someone else. You will recall that Ronald Reagan, when he was president, often sprinkled his talks with stories about everyday people whose situation helped him make a point or gain attention. If you have a story to tell that is especially powerful and relates to the focus of your speech, use it. 39. Hit listeners with a humorous anecdote. The use of a joke to begin a speech is one of the most overworked and most misused ways to begin. It is probably overworked because many speakers don't know any other way. Now that you know several other methods to introduce your speech, if you choose to begin with a joke, it should be a strong opener, not a default. A joke is misused when it in no way relates to the message of the speech. It doesn't set the stage for the listeners or prepare them for your information or persuasion if it is irrelevant to the focus of your speech. A joke is also misused if it is offensive to any of your listeners. Carefully consider the audience you expect in attendance and avoid any material that might offend any of them. You need to build bridges in your introduction, a bridge to your message as well as a bridge of good feeling and rapport between your listeners and you, the speaker. Why would you break that bond by alienating any member of your audience? Even though humor is often misused, it can be effective if used appropriately. Ask yourself these questions. Is the humor related to the focus of the speech, or can I make the connection? Will the material be humorous to this audience? Is my delivery style such that I can make it humorous to this audience? Am I sure the humor will not offend anyone in my audience? Is this the best attention getter for this speech and this audience? If you can answer yes to each of the 5 questions, the use of humor ought to be a viable choice. Make humor work to gain your listeners' attention and then transition to the focus of your speech. 40. Orient your listeners. The first aspect of formulating an introduction to command attention is to pique your listeners' interest. The second is to let your listeners know early in the speech your direction and focus. The transition between the attention step and the main ideas you present should be tightly focused and to the point. The following was the transition John Howard used following a humorous anecdote about a misdirected night. There's a moral to this story. Enthusiasm is not enough. You have to have a sense of direction. Private enterprise, like the bedraggled knight, is not at its best these days. This morning, I want to pose to you the possibility that the troubles which beset the business community may arise because it does not have a very clear idea of who its opponents are, and as a result is focusing much of its defensive energies upon the wrong targets. The sense of direction is amiss. The speaker is now poised to launch his main ideas and develop their supports. 41. Build rapport. Not every speech needs special attempts to build rapport with listeners, but you should take a moment to consider whether there is a need for this speech to this audience by this speaker, you. Whether you spend any time at all, or what proportion of your speech you devote to establishing common ground between you and your listeners, will depend upon your audience analysis. Are your listeners likely to be hostile toward either you or your goal? If yes, you must devote effort to build rapport. A speaker who would move immediately to a discussion of her solution to a problem would be foolish, because surely it will antagonize a significant number of listeners and would be almost doomed to failure from the start. However, if the speaker were to begin by establishing common ground, talking first about the things she and her listeners could agree on, she would have a chance of being effective. Find the basic things you and your listeners will agree on. Start with those. You want your listeners to say internally, "Gee, this person isn't as bad as I thought she was. I didn't think we would agree on anything, but our views aren't so different after all." At this point, the audience is ready to really listen, and you have a chance to make your case. If your main ideas and supports are also well developed for this audience, you may find you are effective in a situation where most speakers would be beaten before they had begun. Another method that can be effective is to ask a series of rhetorical questions to which you are certain your listeners will respond with an internal yes. Do you want your child to have the best possible education? Do you want your child to do well in school? Do you want your child to have available the tools right in your home to help him excel? What parent wouldn't answer yes to each of these questions? Effective speakers attempt to establish common ground with their listeners when speaking to potentially hostile audiences. They help their listeners identify with them and realize they have similar goals. By emphasizing their areas of agreement, speakers stand a better chance that their audience will listen with an open mind and may be persuaded to accept the speaker's point of view. 42. Provide explicit motivation. What makes you pay attention to a speaker? His enthusiasm for his message? The language he uses? The variety of his inflection? His sense of humor? His sensitivity to the audience? All of these things probably are factors influencing your level of attention, but the bottom line motivation is the answer to the question, what's in it for me? When you were a student, you listened to some pretty dreadful lectures, didn't you? You actually paid money for the privilege of going to class and listening to the boring monotones. Why? You wanted the credit hours, and you wanted a decent grade on your transcript. You had motivation, even though it wasn't necessarily the knowledge that was the motivator. If it isn't already obvious to your audience what the payoff will be for them, tell them up front why this is important to them. Will they make the best decision as to which health plan to opt for at their place of employment? Will they be able to negotiate a higher salary at their next performance and salary review? Will they make better investments that will increase their money in the stock market? Whatever the advantage to your listeners, stress the payoff early in your speech, especially if there is any doubt whether they are aware of the importance of the message you are presenting and the ramifications to their lives. 43. Establish credibility. If your speech is addressed to people who know you well, your credibility, whether high or low, is already established with your audience. However, if you speak to audiences that have little information about you, the speaker, you want to establish your credibility. Audiences will pay greater attention to a speaker whom they regard as having expertise and being trustworthy, two of the major components of credibility. How can you build your credibility in the eyes of your audience? If someone is to introduce you, their introduction may be sufficient to provide your listeners with information about your qualifications and accomplishments so that they will view you as a highly credible source and give to you their full attention. If there is to be no one who makes an introduction, it is especially important for you to subtly weave into your early remarks comments that demonstrate what qualifies you to speak on the topic. Make these comments early in your speech, so the attention your listeners give you will be heightened. For example, if you look younger than you are and are constantly being mistaken for a neophyte in your company, while in fact you have many years of experience, the following comment could allay the mistaken impression. In the 15 years I've been with Myco, it has been my experience that single statement could make the difference between listeners daydreaming through your presentation or they're realizing early in your speech that you must have a lot more experience than they thought you had, judging from your youthful appearance. Weaving credibility enhancers subtly into remarks you make early in your speech builds credibility without making you seem pretentious. I have suggested several ways you might choose from to formulate introductions to command listeners' attention. These methods are great starting points, but don't limit yourself to these options. Consider your goal, your audience, your message, your own strengths as a speaker, and you may devise a more perfect introduction for your unique goal than any of the suggestions here. Let me share with you what one student did that was perfect for his particular speech. The assignment had been to give a speech to demonstrate. Dan volunteered as the final speaker of the day. As he strode to the front of the room with a baseball in one hand and a glove in the other hand, no doubt the entire class had expectations of a speech on some aspect of how to play baseball. When Dan got to the front of the classroom, he put the baseball glove down and with a flourish pitched the baseball through the window, which was closed. At this point, he had the attention of everyone in the room. Dan went on to explain that he had spent the prior summer working in a plate glass company. Prior to that experience, he'd had no idea how often people needed to have a pane of glass replaced, either because someone had inadvertently tossed or batted a ball through a window, or the occupants had locked themselves out and had broken a pane to let themselves into the house. Dan indicated that it frequently took a day or more before someone from the glass company could get out to replace a broken pane of glass. But, he continued, it is easy to replace it yourself, and normally, if you'll give the dimensions of the glass to the glass company, they can cut it for you, and you can replace it the very same day. He then proceeded to show the class how to remove the shards and replace the broken pane of glass. Dan had adroitly gotten the attention of his audience. He let his listeners know the focus of his speech. He established his credibility, and he gave his listeners motivation for their attention. He did not attempt to build rapport because his audience analysis suggested this was not necessary. Dan's was a perfect introduction for this speech. It would fit few others. Use the suggested attention getters as possibilities for your speeches, but don't let them limit you. There are other potential openers that you may devise which can be unique and special for achieving your goal. Think of your purpose, and you may create a very special opening that will literally command the attention of every listener. Chapter 5. Close with Power. Many speakers don't know how to conclude a talk. They've worked on the message they want to present, and perhaps they've given thought to an introduction, but they give little or no thought to how they will finish. I've heard many speakers get to the end of their message and conclude with, "That's all." I don't know about the rest of the audience, but I tend to visualize the cartoon character at the end of the Looney Tunes cartoons waving at the audience and saying in a high-pitched voice, "That's all, folks." This is not a power closing. The other frequent end to a speech is for the speaker to ask, "Are there any questions?" There are plenty of occasions when it may be appropriate, desirable, and even expected that there will be an opportunity for the audience to pose questions. However, this should not be confused as a substitute for a conclusion. Rather, the opportunity for questions to be asked should be an additional step. A question and answer session is not a power closing. In fact, as soon as you open the floor to questions from the audience, you relinquish control over the focus. Communication studies indicate listeners remember best the beginning and end of a speech. In fact, as soon as a speaker says, "In conclusion," listeners will perk up their ears. So take advantage of the heightened attention you will have as you conclude your presentation. You want to both focus the audience attention on the main thrust or goal of your speech and leave them with a memorable statement. Once you conclude your speech, walk back to your seat with the same demeanor of confidence with which you approached the podium to begin. 44. Summarize your main points. This is your opportunity to hit your listeners for the final time with the main thrust of your talk or a succinct summary of the main points. Take advantage of it. Focus listeners' heightened attention where you want it to be. Though we'll look at delivery secrets a bit later, it is worth noting that if your goal is persuasive, this is a point to be especially dynamic in your delivery. Your conviction is itself a powerful persuader. Your summary of main points is the first power tool of your speech closing. The summary of your main points focuses listener attention, but in most cases it may not be memorable in a powerful way. So after summarizing the main points and focusing the audience attention where you want it to be, utilize the second power tool of your conclusion. You want to leave them with what I call a statement of impact. This memorable or impact statement has a similar goal to the attention step in the introduction. But rather than gain attention, as did the introduction, used in the conclusion, this power tool will retain audience attention. A strong statement of impact will make the speech memorable and better recalled. Any of the methods suggested for getting attention in the introduction, with the exception of suspense, may be used to conclude. Your task is to select the closing you believe will be the most memorable to your audience, as well as supportive of your goal. 45. Refer to the subject or occasion. Just as a speaker may choose to begin a speech by referring to the occasion, it is possible to close by making reference to the reason the group is gathered. The speaker might also allude to carrying on the work that the organization has been engaged in, or looking forward to the next anniversary the group will celebrate, and suggesting goals to be met prior to that occasion. 46. End with a powerful quotation. The quotation most often is a different quotation, or even a different method than the one used in the introduction to the speech. But if you have a really strong quotation, it may be powerful enough to use at both the beginning and the end of your speech. It can tie the speech together and provide unity. 47. Ask a rhetorical question. Again, you are asking a question to which you want your listeners to respond internally. You are not asking them to shout out a response or raise their hands to be called upon. By now, their internal responses should meet your expectations. Their internal answers should be, whether positive or negative, the ones you expect. 48. Make a startling statement. You may choose to close with a startling statement, whether or not you use this method for your opening. With a strong startling statement, it is even possible to begin and end with the same startling statement. If you use the same statement to both begin and end your speech, Make sure you make the decision because you believe this statement to be a really strong and appropriate one for your speech goal. Do not make the decision because it is simply easier for you than formulating a different opening and closing. 49. Leave listeners with a vivid illustration. A strong story, vividly told, can leave a lasting impression and make your speech and its main thrust memorable. 50. Leave listeners with a humorous anecdote. As was the case with the introduction, be cautious with the use of humor. The humorous story should relate to the focus of your speech, be told with a delivery style that lends itself to the humorous nature of the anecdote, and should not be offensive to anyone. 51. Issue a challenge or appeal. If you have attempted to move your listeners to do something, you may challenge them to meet a goal or appeal to them to take action. 52. Keep a second closing in reserve. You have planned a summary of your main points and you have a statement of impact to close your presentation, but you are not finished yet. Prepare a second statement of impact and keep it in reserve. Then, if there is to be a question-answer session that will be conducted by either you, the speaker, or the moderator, you will be ready. At the end of the questions, you are not going to just thank the audience and sit down. To do that would not be memorable, it would not be powerful, and very likely it would not leave your listeners with the focus you had intended. You want to take back the floor, the focus, and the force. You do this by closing with the second conclusion you are holding in reserve. Present this second conclusion, and you not only have a memorable close, you add polish and professionalism as well. Chapter 6. Prepare like a pro. A pro is prepared, professional, and polished. The 12 secrets that follow will help you be thoroughly prepared. 53. Check the speaking environment prior to your presentation. Secret number 5 suggested you consider elements pertaining to the situation in which you would deliver your speech. That analysis was to help you plan for your speech as you put it together. At this point in your preparations, you need to conduct a thorough check of the environment where you will present your speech and seek to modify those elements of the situation you wish to have changed and adapt to those that are unchangeable. Check the room yourself if you can. If the presentation is to be in another city, talk with someone who has actually been in the room. Have specific questions you ask. Is there a stage area? If there is a stage or raised platform, how high is it? Is there special lighting that will be focused on the speaking area? Is there a lectern or a podium? Is it open so I can move around it freely? Is there a microphone, fixed or lavalier? Do I really need a mic in this room? What audio-visual equipment is available? Any special placement required? How many people will the room hold? How is the seating arranged? Can the chairs be moved, or are they bolted to the floor? What is the temperature like in the room? Can I control it? How? What is the noise level from other rooms or outside in the room? These are some of the situational constraints you may wish to check personally or ask about. Formulate your own list. Add any special concerns you have about your speaking environment. 54. Change environmental elements to fit your style and goal. As soon as possible, check the environment where you will present your speech. If you check on the situational constraints early enough, you may be able to change elements of the situation to better fit your presentation style or your speaking goal. If the room size, arrangement for audience seating, noise level, or other conditions that cannot be altered are not conducive to your style or goals, It may be possible to change the room assignment if you begin early. If, however, you wait until a day or two prior to your presentation to find the problem, you're likely to be stuck with it. Always request any items such as a lectern, audio-visual equipment, an extension cord, or other materials you need. Follow up a few days before the presentation to make certain the requested items will be available. If you ship things for your presentation to another location, call ahead to be sure of the name of the person you will ship to. Then call to make sure the shipment has been received. 55. Prepare your introducer with an introduction. If you are fortunate to have someone make a formal introduction of you to your audience, make the most of this opportunity. You want your listeners to think as highly of you, your qualifications, and accomplishments as possible. The initial attention they give to you will be directly related to how they feel about you, your expertise, as well as whether they trust you. Since you can't go around saying how great you are, let the person who introduces you do it for you. If someone is to introduce you, list your qualifications and accomplishments, those that are appropriate to the topic and thrust of your speech, as well as being positive credentials to the particular audience you will address. I would list them as bulleted items rather than try to write out the introduction. This makes it more likely that the person making the introduction will use the items you wish, yet use her own words so that it sounds more naturally like the person making the introduction. It may also save you the embarrassment of having the introducer conclude by saying that he read the introduction exactly as you wrote it. You may even comment to the person who is to introduce you that you will include only those things you believe will be of interest to the audience as they relate to the speech you will present. Then make 2 copies. Fax, mail, or give 1 copy to the person who will make the introduction. Take the second copy with you when you give your speech. The second copy takes no additional time to make, but is a lifesaver when the chairperson has left hers at home, the dog ate it, or the CIA confiscated it. You can remain focused on keeping mentally prepared for the speech you are to deliver, rather than trying to hastily reconstruct your accomplishments, and the introduction of you and your credentials will not suffer. 56. Select a title that's a hit. You do not need a title for every speech you present. If you are making a short presentation at a meeting of your department at work, you probably do not need a speech title. In fact, in such a situation, a title might seem overly pompous. Normally, you should formulate a title for your speech if there is to be something in print. A printed program, an announcement in the newspaper, or a sign advertising the presentation. You may title your speech if someone is going to introduce you to the audience, so the title may be used in the introduction. However, you, the speaker, should not begin by announcing your speech title. Start with the introduction you have prepared. When selecting a title for your speech, give it careful thought. The title is your advertisement to draw the audience. The title should attempt to gain attention and generate interest in order to entice people to attend your speech. At the same time, the title should honestly portray what the audience can expect to hear. Remember, you have to face the crowd. 57. Use the 3-minute prep for unexpected speeches. There are 4 delivery methods for speeches. 3 of them require extensive preparation and are the subject of the 58th secret. However, one method, impromptu, is literally without preparation. So this delivery method is not one you would choose. It is thrust upon you in a situation for which you had no advance warning and hence no opportunity to prepare. Situations like this do occur and may happen to you. You arrive a few minutes before the meeting is to begin, and your boss tells you that John, who was supposed to deliver a talk about employees' options in the new pension plan, is sick today. Your boss asks you to make the presentation to the assembled group. So, what do? Do you get nervous, as evidenced by the butterflies you suddenly feel in your stomach? Does a little voice in your head keep hammering negative thoughts? I can't do this. I'm going to make a fool of myself. I'm going to get up there and nothing but babble is going to come out. Do this and you let your internal critic take over. Your critic is that internal voice that says you can't do it. You're going to fail. If you allow yourself to indulge in and reinforce such negative thoughts, it may become a self-fulfilling prophecy. You have a better option. Say no to the negativism and let your internal coach take over instead. Your coach tells you to make the best of what little time you have to prepare. I make 2 assumptions for this method to be useful. First, that you have some expertise on the subject. You've probably been working on this project, and your boss feels that, next to John, you know the most about the pension plan options. Second, that you can find a minimum of 3 minutes before you actually begin your presentation. If all else fails, make a short trip to the restroom. You'll probably need that right now anyway. You will need a piece of paper and a pen. Make a habit of always carrying both these items with you. Take the first 2 minutes to jot down a short phrase noting each of the ideas you think you might cover that are related to the topic and goal. Just brainstorm these ideas quickly. Try to limit your notes to 2 or 3 words for each idea and put them in a list form, one under the other. When limiting yourself to 2 or 3 words per idea, you'll find that nouns are the most useful triggers. Later, when you look down at your notes, they will provide a quick mental cue to what you want to talk about. Take that 3rd minute you were allotted for preparation to order your list. You need not rewrite your ideas, just place a number in front of each idea, 1, 2, 3, and cross out any ideas you decide to delete. Use this 3-minute prep whenever you have a presentation suddenly thrust upon you. Since it gives the opportunity for some preparation, you will feel more confident and your talk will be more coherent than if you take your other option, which is to do nothing with those 3 minutes except get nervous. The feedback I get from participants in my seminars who have tried the 3-minute prep is that it works wonders. 58. Determine your delivery method. The 3-minute prep is a great tool for unexpected talks, situations where you have no forewarning of an impending speech, but it is not a substitute for the thorough preparation you should engage in for all other occasions, when you do know in advance you will present a speech. For the prepared speech, there are 3 delivery methods from which to select the one that will best fit both you and your audience: extemporaneous, manuscript, memorized. Up to this point in your speech preparation, the same amount of effort has been expended, regardless of which delivery method you would use. As you gathered data, selected and organized your main ideas, developed an introduction and conclusion, the steps taken and time spent were the same no matter which delivery method you might later choose. But now you must make a choice of delivery method. Consider the audience. Which style will be best suited for them? Consider yourself, the speaker, as well. The amount of time you spend preparing at this point will be affected by the choice you make. For an extemporaneous speech, you'll make notes consisting of phrases that will jog in your mind each of the points you wish to make and in the order you have planned. As you deliver the speech, you'll glance at your notes and then talk about each point using the words that come to your mind. This gives the extemporaneous speech the advantage of sounding natural to listeners who are used to hearing this style of speech. It is usually an easy style for the audience to listen to and tends to hold their attention. It also gives the speaker an opportunity to make eye contact with the audience most of the time, note their reactions, and respond to the feedback with clarification or additional support for ideas. If you choose to deliver a manuscript speech, you'll need to write out your entire speech word for word. Then you will need to become thoroughly familiar with your manuscript so that you can deliver it smoothly and with as much eye contact with your audience as possible. Because you are tied to the manuscript, it is unlikely that you will make modifications in response to audience feedback. A manuscript speech is a written document delivered orally. The writing style is more formal than the oral style we are used to, and hence more difficult for the audience to listen to and understand. When we read written material, we can go back and reread sections of material which were unclear. Listeners do not have the opportunity to rehear your speech. Remember, It is more difficult to listen to the written style of a manuscript than the oral style of an extemporaneous speech. For a memorized speech, you will need to write out a manuscript and commit it to memory. A memorized speech retains the disadvantages of a manuscript speech with 2 additional disadvantages thrown in. It is very time-consuming to memorize a speech. Unless you have a photographic memory, you will live in mortal fear that you will forget your speech. So, what is the bottom line when making the decision whether to select an extemporaneous, manuscript, or memorized delivery method? Though all 3 methods involve a significant expenditure of time if you are to give it your best, the extemporaneous presentation will take the least time to prepare, the manuscript speech will take more of your time than extemporaneous, and the memorized will take the most time of the 3 to prepare. I cannot urge you too strongly to develop your ability to make extemporaneous presentations. In most of the speaking situations you encounter, it will be your best delivery choice. To develop your skill at making extemporaneous presentations is to empower yourself. For otherwise, you are likely to continue to give manuscript speeches, not because they are your best choice, but because you feel you have no other option. Are there any situations where a manuscript speech might be preferred or necessary? If you don't prepare your own speeches, but have a speechwriter who prepares them, you will most likely find it difficult to deliver them extemporaneously. What makes the extemp presentation possible is the close contact the speaker has had with the material through the data gathering, selection, and organization stages of preparation. Without this close association throughout the development of their material, most speakers will rely on a manuscript. The best speechwriters will write in a style that sounds believable and natural for the intended speaker. A manuscript, because of its greater use of polysyllabic words and compound and complex sentence structures, will sound more formal. Hence, for a formal speech of policy by a head of state, our expectations are met by the tone of the manuscript speech. It is also true that for an important policy speech, where words must be chosen very carefully to avoid misunderstanding, the manuscript allows the speaker to carefully select his words. If a speech is to be broadcast, a manuscript will allow the speaker to better fit the speech into the precise time slot. It is difficult to present an extemporaneous speech and fit it to within a few seconds of a designated time. 59. Prepare notes, extemporaneous. If you have elected to use an extemporaneous delivery, your next step will be to prepare notes to aid you in delivering your speech. Your notes, if properly formulated, will assure that you will present the points you have selected in the order you have determined. Before starting to make notes, it is important to determine whether there will be a lectern available and whether you plan to use it. If you will not be using a lectern, put your notes on note cards, at least a 4x6 size. Note cards are preferable to sheets of paper if no lectern will be used. The smaller size is less obtrusive, and the heavier weight will be easier to work with if you must hold them as you speak. The 4x6 size will allow you to get more on each card and still leave enough blank space so that your notes will not be too crowded. If you plan to use the lectern, don't put your notes on note cards. Use larger sheets of paper instead. A standard 8.5x11 paper size will fit on any lectern I have seen without creeping over the edge of the lectern. In fact, 2 sheets of this size can fit side by side without showing, so as you finish with one sheet, you can slide it unobtrusively over to the side. Most lecterns will even handle legal-size sheets of paper. The larger sheets of paper will allow you to leave space while placing more information on each page. You will have fewer pages to keep track of and shuffle. The lectern will allow your notes to be unobtrusive, and the lighter weight paper stock won't flutter in your hands. Use separate sheets of paper, no paper attached to a notepad or in a notebook. I have seen too many speakers lessen their polished image with yellow notepad paper hanging down the front of the lectern as they turn page after page. As you construct your notes, use short phrases. preferably no more than 2 to 4 words for each of the main ideas and supports you will present. This is a case where less is more. Many inexperienced speakers start out to make notes and end up with a manuscript. Remember, these notes are to trigger in your mind the ideas you want to convey and keep you focused on the order you have determined is best for your topic, goal, and audience. You will glance down at your notes to check what should come next, but you can look back at your listeners as you deliver the message. If you write out too much, you'll be afraid to look at your audience much. You'll be afraid you will have difficulty finding your place in your notes when you next need to check them. Since you have researched, selected, and organized the message, you are familiar with the material. You should only need a short phrase to jog your memory as to the idea you will cover next. The words you select for the short phrases on your notes should be primarily nouns. Nouns are the single words that will convey the most meaning to jog your thinking as you speak. For each word you place on your notes, ask yourself whether you really need that word to trigger in your mind what comes next. Don't write out anything more than you absolutely need. Extra verbiage is your enemy later as you use your notes. Whether you are using note cards or sheets of paper, leave lots of space on the paper, between lines, on both sides, on the top and bottom of the page. The more space you leave and the less verbiage you use, the easier it will be to find your place when you need to glance at your notes. Number your pages. Place a number in one of the corners of each page so that if your pages get out of order, you drop your notes on the way to the lectern, you can quickly put them back in order. If you have decided to present your speech extemporaneously, make your notes carefully and then use them. I don't know why it is, but some speakers seem to believe that the notes are there as a crutch, and that if they can present the speech without referring to their notes, it makes them better speakers. Your notes are not a crutch, they are an aid. Using notes is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of a well-prepared speaker. Make certain that as you finish talking about the material on each page, you move that page out of the way, so that any time you need to glance at your notes, the point you will be discussing is easy to locate. 60. Prepare a manuscript. If you've chosen to deliver your speech from a manuscript, or if you intend to memorize your presentation, you now must actually write your speech word for word. This will be a time-consuming task as you select each word and phrase exactly as you will present it. Put your manuscript on full sheets of paper and use a larger than normal type size. Like the extemporaneous speaker, you want to leave space between lines. Double or triple space your text. Even though you're reading from a manuscript, you need to look at and make eye contact with your audience as frequently as possible. Leaving space between lines in your text will help you find your place as you return to your manuscript. Because a manuscript speech will sound more formal in language choice and sentence structure than an extemporaneous speech, try to write for the ear. Avoid extremely lengthy sentences. Use a greater number of simple sentences than you ordinarily would if you were writing a piece to be read, and make liberal use of 1- and 2-syllable words in your speech. If you write for the ear, you will be rewarded with a more attentive audience. If the listeners are attentive, you are more likely to be effective. 61. Time your speech. At this point in your preparation, talk through an extemporaneous speech or read through a manuscript speech to get an indication of the time it takes to deliver, as well as how it sounds. You want to time your speech again later once you are more familiar with it and once you've done any further editing. An extemporaneous speech is actually likely to become longer as you practice it. You tend to add embellishments to various points as you become more comfortable with the material. However, this initial run-through as you time your speech will indicate whether you are in the ballpark. 62. Edit, edit, edit. Edit if you exceed the time limits. Don't hesitate to cut material from your speech if once you time it, you find it runs too long. You know that 20 minutes is the limit for optimum adult attention. You also should know the audience's expectation of length. No matter how great you believe your material is, you defeat your goal if you greatly exceed the expected time limit. You will lose your listeners' attention and risk making many of them angry at you. Edit if you can find a better way to make a point. Perhaps the situation has changed and one of your examples is no longer pertinent. Cut it out. Perhaps since you originally put together your speech, you've come across a story that really makes your point. Put it in. Don't be afraid to make a change if it will improve your speech. 63. Anticipate questions from the audience. Did you ever wonder how the president does such a good job answering questions thrown at him following his press conferences? Even though he may not know exactly what question Helen Thomas or Sam Donaldson may fire at him, he and his aides know the subjects that are most likely to come up. The president prepares accordingly. So should you. Once you have prepared your speech, your work is not over. Anticipate the kinds of questions you are likely to be asked. For each potential question, consider the strategy of your response. Don't try to memorize answers. At best, they will only sound rehearsed, and at worst, you'll forget what you tried to memorize. But if you think through a strategy for your response, you'll be prepared. You'll retain your cool composure, and you'll appear polished and competent. Effective speakers try to anticipate everything and leave nothing to chance. 64. Have questions ready to throw in the ring. If, after the conclusion of your speech, you open the floor for questions, and there are none, you may feel it weakens that last impression you leave with your audience. After waiting an appropriate length of time for questions, if there are none, you could wind up by indicating how much you enjoyed the opportunity to speak to them, and then move into that second conclusion you're holding in reserve. However, are there some questions that you wish someone would ask? Are there questions that you nearly always are asked when you present a speech on this topic? Is there something you wanted to include, but didn't feel there was time because you were asked to leave 10 minutes for questions at the end? Part of your preparation might include having 2 or 3 questions ready in case the audience isn't responsive. After a short pause, you could say, one of the most frequent questions I get asked is... After you've answered one question, the audience may loosen up and ask several of their own. At any point, either after you have posed 1 or 2 of your own, or after the audience has finally made queries, you can conclude with that second closing you are holding in reserve. Chapter 7. Control Fear. To stand up in front of a group of people and communicate with them is an opportunity. Yet for many speakers, the very thought fills them with fear and dread rather than excitement and eager anticipation. What is it about addressing an audience of 10 or more people that can turn otherwise competent adults into such flustered souls? Nervousness is a symptom of a heightened sensitivity which is needed to perform well. Except that some nervousness will actually help you perform better. There is no magic pill that will instantly dispel the symptoms of nervousness, but the 13 secrets that follow, taken together, should significantly lessen your feelings of anxiety when you present a speech. 65. Solid preparation is your best defense. There is no substitute for being well prepared. The process starts with giving yourself adequate time for preparation and thoroughly completing each step in the speech writing process. From gathering data, selecting the main ideas and supporting materials, formulating an introduction and conclusion, preparing your notes or a manuscript, to practicing, talking through your speech, each step takes time. If you procrastinate and wait until the night before your speech to begin to prepare, you limit both your effectiveness and your self-confidence. The normal level of nervousness now increases as you realize you've blown your opportunity. how much better your speech will be and how much better you will feel if you have taken the time to prepare and digest your material at each step along the way to actually delivering your presentation. Few things are as great a confidence builder as you approach the lectern on the day of your speech as knowing you are prepared. 66. Be totally familiar with your introduction. Most speakers find they are most nervous immediately prior to and during the first minute of their speeches. Be especially familiar with the introduction of your speech. Once you have gotten through the first minute or two of your speech, you will probably begin to feel more comfortable and confident, especially if this has gone well. 67. Practice out loud often. Talk through your speech as many times as you can. Stand up as you deliver your practice presentations and try to approximate those conditions you can control to make them close to what you will encounter in the actual situation. As you practice, the most important thing is that you actually talk through the speech. How many people, if any, are listening is not important. You may have no one in your practice audience, or you may speak in front of your child, your spouse, or a friend. If no one is readily available to pose as an audience for your practice sessions, I often suggest that speakers talk to a clock. It has a face, it may show more movement than some listeners, and it provides an opportunity to time your speech. If you plan to present an extemporaneous speech, practice establishing as much eye contact as possible with the area where the audience will be seated during your actual presentation. Talk to this audience area, sweeping the room with your eyes, stopping to establish eye contact with various items in the room, as you will establish eye contact with listeners during your actual presentation. As you near the end of your comments about the point you are making, but before you actually finish the thought you are on, look at your notes to determine the next point you will cover. Look back at your audience as you complete your present thought, and then transition smoothly to your next point. During your practice sessions, you will be able to determine whether your notes are sufficient to trigger each idea in your mind as you talk through your speech. If you have too many notes, which is likely, pare them down. Remember, the fewer notes you take to the lectern, the better, as long as the notes are sufficient to trigger the ideas you want to present. If your notes are too few, add what you need at the appropriate place. If you have prepared a manuscript speech, you too need to talk through the speech out loud. Learn to pace at a comfortable rate for your listeners. Become so familiar with your speech that you can establish frequent eye contact with your listeners. Become familiar with where ideas fall on the page, and make use of red pens to underline or highlight ideas you want to stress. No matter what your delivery format, use these practice sessions to gain confidence by gaining familiarity with your material and the notes or manuscript you've constructed. Be sure you can pronounce all words you may use and time your speech to assure that you will be within the time limits. 68. Record your speech. Practice talking through your speech a few times before you record it. After you have talked through your speech a few times, videotape a practice session if you can, but if videotaping is not readily accessible, an audio tape can yield a lot of information. Watch or listen to your tape and make notes of things you want to modify. Practice a few more times without taping, trying to incorporate changes in the areas you wanted to modify. Then record yourself again. You should notice improvements in the targeted areas. Don't allow your internal critic to batter your self-image. None of us is ever satisfied with how we see or hear ourselves. Allow your internal coach to take over as you view or listen to the tapes. Your internal coach will help you identify what you can modify in order to make a better presentation. These positive attempts at behavior modification are what is needed as you refine and polish your presentation. 69. Practice mentally. Although practice by delivering your speech out loud is important, you can supplement these practice sessions by talking through the speech silently to yourself. If you have a few minutes during your lunch break or while riding the bus or train to work, it is possible to look at your notes and as you focus on each trigger on your notes, mentally think through the points you wish to make. 70. Focus on ideas, not exact phrases. If you have selected an extemporaneous delivery, remember as you practice, as well as when you actually deliver the speech, that you are not trying to say the same thing in the same way each time you present it. That would be memorization. Your goal is to use your notes to trigger in your mind the ideas you want to present in the order you have predetermined. Once that idea has been triggered, try to convey the idea to your listeners in the words that come to you. You may find you use some phrases almost each and every time you talk through your speech, but other ideas may be phrased somewhat differently from one practice to another. This is as it should be. Don't feel bound by one way of communicating an idea. Let go of the idea that you have to say the same thing in the same way each time. If you will do this, you need never be afraid of forgetting your speech. There's nothing to forget. Your notes will trigger in your mind the ideas you have selected to present. Since it is the ideas and not an exact way of phrasing them that you wish to convey, go with what comes to your mind at the time. 71. Concentrate on your message rather than on yourself. Concentrate on your message and your goal. To convey that message to your listeners. Put all of your energy into this mission, and you will not have time to think about yourself. It is easier said than done, but it is a powerful secret of effective speakers. Nervousness comes in part from focusing one's attention on the internal question, how am I doing? If your focus is on yourself and how you are doing, how you look, how you sound, what the audience thinks about you, your energy is misplaced. Focus instead on your message. You believe in it. You believe it is important to your listeners. Put your focus where it should be, on your message and your listeners, and before you know it, you will realize you don't feel nervous. 72. Nervousness connects you to the human race. Everyone experiences some nervousness making presentations. The difference is one of degree. The degree of apprehension varies according to many factors: individual personality, amount of preparation, and amount of public speaking experience account for the most variation of nervousness among speakers. Knowing that feeling some degree of nervousness is common to everyone should help you accept these feelings as a normal part of being human. Recognize, too, that you are in good company. Many famous and accomplished individuals, from U.S. presidents to award-winning actors and actresses, admit to always having experienced some degree of apprehension prior to going before an audience. Helen Hayes, Johnny Carson, Carol Burnett, Merv Griffin, Joan Rivers, Liza Minnelli, Sidney Poitier, and Christopher Reeves have all talked publicly about their continuing efforts to deal with nervousness. So you get nervous before presenting a speech? You're in good company. 73. Remember, you appear much more confident than you feel. So your hands are shaking and your knees wobbling, and you are sure your audience can see it. You can feel your voice trembling, and you are certain your listeners can hear it. You are terrified, and your audience can't help but be aware of it. Probably not. Time after time, participants in my seminars sit down at the end of their speech, breathe a sigh of relief, and say how nervous they were. They're sure we are all aware of it, even sitting there feeling sorry for them as we listened, because we, the audience, were so acutely aware of their nervousness. The truth? Almost always, their delivery showed no overt signs of the nervousness they felt. Even when they have shared with the rest of the group for 3 days how nervous they get when making a presentation, usually the only clue we have is their protestations to that fact. Even when we, the other participants, as well as myself, Tell them how self-assured and professional they appeared. They assure us how nervous they felt. Do we believe them? Of course we do. But what they need to understand is that what they are feeling does not show. It is not apparent to the audience. If they did not tell us, we would not know. Most of us have learned to hide our feelings of nervousness and are quite good at it. Even after they've seen their presentations on videotape, they still try to convince us that they really did feel nervous. So remember, for most speakers, the nervousness that you feel will not show. Let this knowledge build your confidence. And since you want your presentation to be as professional and polished as possible, don't spoil your secret by telling everyone either before or after your speech how nervous you felt. Accept compliments graciously. 74. Breathe deeply from your diaphragm. Any of you who have played a wind instrument or sung in a choir will know about your diaphragm and how to breathe from your diaphragm. For those of you who do not, take one of your hands and make a fist. Center that fist at your midsection with the thumb at or slightly below your navel. Hold your fist still and try to thrust your fist outward using outward pressure from the muscle you should find behind or slightly below your navel. A deep breath that starts from the diaphragm will counter some of the feelings of nervousness being produced by the increased adrenaline. A deep breath before you leave your seat, another as you approach the lectern, and yet another just before you begin to speak will have a calming effect. 75. Channel your adrenaline. Increased adrenaline is your body's defense mechanism to help you in difficult situations. Even though it may seem to be your enemy in the 20th century, adrenaline can be your ally. Rather than fight it, put that extra energy that is created into your presentation. Use the adrenaline rush to generate and sustain the enthusiasm that will make you a dynamic speaker. That adrenaline will also keep you alert and heighten your ability to think on your feet. Effective speakers are dynamic speakers. Just ask Michael Dukakis or Bob Dole what a lack of dynamism can do to thwart reaching one's goal. 76. Dress for the occasion. Dress to build confidence. Before you ever open your mouth to speak, your listeners have already begun to form impressions about you. Whether you are competent, whether you are trustworthy, whether you are likable, before you say a word, these impressions are being formed. Like it or not, initially others do judge us based on our appearance. So select your attire based in part on the messages you wish to convey to your audience. Is it your goal to appear authoritative and powerful, trustworthy, likable? In some situations, your primary goal will be to convey nonverbal messages that say you are competent and in control. Your goal when selecting your attire will be to choose clothing that enhances your look of expertise, authority, and power to the maximum. If you are a male, your most powerful look is a suit, a dark gray or a dark blue, paired with a white long-sleeved shirt and a tie. If you are female, a suit is also your most powerful look, and traditional colors of dark gray or navy work best. Perhaps you are as concerned with how trustworthy you appear to your listeners. Speakers, both men and women, will find a medium blue or navy suit paired with a white shirt or blouse will enhance the degree of trust felt by their audience. In other situations, you may choose to de-emphasize a look of power so as to appear less powerful or intimidating to an audience. A man may elect to wear a suit in a color that conveys less authority, or may choose slacks, sport coat, and tie. Either option says professional, but less powerful. A woman may select a suit in colors that convey less power, or wear a base of the one color, a navy skirt and blouse, with a jacket in either a contrasting color or a plaid that picks up the color of the base. Whatever your apparel decisions, analyze your choices and your reasons carefully. You've spent a lot of time preparing your speech. Select attire that conveys nonverbal messages that further your goal. As you analyze the speaking situation, did you consider physical elements of the place where you will present your speech? Will you be on a stage? Will bright lights be focused on you? Will you be speaking in a dimly lit room or auditorium? Will you be behind a lectern? If you speak in a dimly lit room, a dark suit may need a light or bright accent in the necktie or scarf to bring you to life. Some women report choosing to wear a red suit or jacket when presenting a speech because they believe the color helps keep listeners' attention focused on them. However, if you will be bathed in bright lighting, you might choose to tone down a red jacket or accessories. If you will be on a high platform or stage, and especially if there's no lectern, be very careful about the length of your skirt. By dressing to fit the occasion and your goals, you will build your self-confidence. Knowing you look the part will help you act the part of a confident, poised presenter. Effective speakers earn audience goodwill and trust and are viewed as having expertise based initially on how they look. The speaker can then build on this positive start with a well-prepared and focused message. 77. Psych yourself into readiness. Do you remember the song from The King and I, where Anna counsels her son to whistle a happy tune? She tells him if he'll whistle whenever he feels afraid, he'll not only fool others, he'll fool himself as well. Psychologists tell us that our minds can only hold one thought at a time. Are you going to let your internal critic take over and hold thoughts of fear and failure in your mind? Or will you allow your internal coach to take the lead and fill your mind with thoughts of confidence and success? Visualize the role you want to play, one of confidence and self-assurance, and act the part. Approach the lectern with a purposeful and confident stride. Stand erect behind the lectern with your head held high and your shoulders square and back straight. Project your voice with an air of confidence. Convey your conviction and enthusiasm in your manner and your voice. These actions form part of the basis for the next section, which deals with commanding the attention of your audience. But these behaviors are equally important to your feelings of self-confidence as you command your body to behave in ways consistent with your goal of appearing, as well as being, self-assured. Fill your mind with confident, positive thoughts. Carry your body as if you feel confident and positive, and you can manage to both look and feel fearless. Chapter 8. Command attention. Your demeanor conveys authority. You've heard the adage, you never get a second chance to make a first impression. When you face an audience, make it a positive first impression. Before you say a word, your listeners are forming impressions of you, whether you seem competent, trustworthy, likable. From how you dress, how you approach the lectern, how you project your voice, the audience is making judgments about you based on many nonverbal cues. You begin to command attention as you step up to the lectern with a confident, purposeful demeanor. An enthusiastic walk, head held high with shoulders back, and a confident facial expression. You command attention as you stand erect behind the lectern, weight evenly distributed on both feet. You command attention as you look up at your audience and pause before you speak. And when you do speak, you command attention in the way you project your voice and convey dynamism. Let's look at these delivery factors that convey your credibility, competence, and professionalism, and in so doing, command attention from your audience. You want to appear in control, confident, credible, and dynamic. 78. Approach the lectern with confidence. What do you, as a listener, think when you see a speaker step up to the front of the room with a strong, purposeful stride, shoulders back and head held high, and with a determined, confident demeanor? Contrast that speaker with one who takes small, tentative steps toward the lectern and who walks with shoulders slumped and a fearful expression on his face. You must begin to command attention by the very manner in which you step up to the lectern to present your speech. This is the time to whistle a happy tune, so to speak. Even if your knees feel like jelly, your outward demeanor must convey a confident person who is in control and really anxious to share your message with this audience. The audience will grant far greater credibility and hence attention to the speaker whose demeanor exudes confidence than to the speaker whose body language conveys meekness and a lack of confidence. So leave your seat with a confident, enthusiastic gait, body carriage, and facial expression, and step up to the lectern with a purposeful demeanor that conveys your pleasure at the opportunity to address this group. 79. Get set before you speak. Have you ever seen a speaker who began talking before he got to the front of the room, let alone behind the lectern? Or have you observed a speaker who got to the lectern and started speaking as he hastily arranged his notes? These are not the behaviors of polished speakers. If you are using notes or a manuscript, walk to the lectern carrying the papers in the hand that will be least visible to the audience. You're not trying to hide your notes, but neither do you need to flaunt them. When you reach the front of the room, position yourself behind the lectern. Arrange your notes. The pages should already be in proper order. Take a deep breath, look up at your audience, and pause before you begin. When you look up at your audience, it is a signal that you are about to begin. At this point, the audience chatter should diminish, although there will be audible sounds as listeners position themselves in their chairs to give attention to your message. The pause before you speak serves three purposes. First, it gives time for the audience chatter to die down. Second, it gives you a moment to collect your thoughts, get your first sentence clear in your head, take another deep breath if you need one, and remember how glad you are to have this opportunity to present an important message to this audience. Third, the pause is a sign of a polished, confident speaker. 80. Stand erect behind the lectern. Have you ever seen a speaker lean all over the lectern, propping himself up as if without the lectern to hold his weight, he would surely not be able to stand? To lean on the lectern conveys an informality as well as a lack of strength and forcefulness that fails to command attention. As you begin your speech, either stand erect behind the lectern, or if you decide not to use the lectern, move away from it altogether. It is permissible to rest a hand on the side of the lectern closest to you, the speaker, if that makes you feel comfortable. Try not to grasp the lectern and hold on for dear life. Even if the audience cannot see this, you limit the likelihood that you will use that hand in natural gestures. Another danger, if you grasp the lectern, is that you start playing with the lectern. I recall one speaker who, in his nervousness, outlined the lectern with his hands through most of the speech. These hand tracings were an outlet for his nervousness, and the speaker was totally unaware of what he was doing, but the audience was intent on where the hands would move next. Did he have the audience's attention? Yes, but the audience was paying far less attention to what the speaker was saying than what he was doing. This distraction was interfering with communication of the message. Your goal is not to attract attention, but to command attention. Use the lectern to hold your notes, but not to hold you. 81. Distribute your weight evenly on both feet. We have all seen the speaker who teeters from side to side or front to back as he speaks. This, too, can quickly become a distraction to the audience. Standing with your weight evenly distributed on both feet forces you to stand taller and makes you appear in control and hence confident. Your stance gives added weight to the importance of your message and adds strength to your perceived credibility. 82. Project your voice. Speak with authority. You might be surprised how many speakers, both men and women, simply don't project their voice well enough to be easily heard. Yes, there are microphones, but microphones are not always available and often do not work well when they are provided. But even if you use a microphone, you want to come across as confident rather than tentative, so the habit of voice projection is a crucial one to build. You need to project your voice to be heard, to maintain interest, and to be perceived as credible. Beyond being heard, critical though this is, voice projection is necessary to build the credibility of the speaker. The speaker who speaks with a low volume is perceived as having less status, power, expertise, and dynamism than the speaker who projects well. If you are shorter than average, appear youthful, or are female, it especially behooves you to project your voice adequately to establish your credibility and convey your authority from the very beginning of your presentation. Women can project their voices as well as men, so don't buy into the notion that you can't project adequately because you are female. You want the audience to view you as being knowledgeable? You want the audience to view you as an authority? You want the audience to believe you are committed to your cause or view? Project your voice. 83. Convey dynamism. Dynamism is that excitement, that enthusiasm from the speaker that conveys authority as well as conviction to the listeners. Its result puts a sparkle in your eyes, animation on your face, a forcefulness in your voice, and says to your audience, "I really believe this, so you should too." Real feelings light up your voice and face. I don't suggest you try to fake enthusiasm, but rather that you select speaking goals you truly believe in, and then let that natural enthusiasm show. If you are a low-key person by nature, it would behoove you to practice displaying a greater degree of facial expression and gestures and projecting greater vocal forcefulness. Avoid what I refer to as the Tsongas, Dukakis, and Dole syndrome. All three were men of vision, experience, and expertise, but their lack of dynamism killed their chance of holding the highest office in the country, President of the United States. 84. Conclude, then leave the lectern with confidence. Your speech isn't really over until you get back in your car to drive home. No exaggerated sighs of relief at the close, no rolling of your eyes as if to say, "Thank heavens that's over," as you start to walk back to your seat. No hunching of your shoulders as if to suggest the weight of the world has just been lifted. A professional would never do any of these things, and you want to develop into a professional and polished speaker. So take pride in the speech you have just presented. Retain that assured demeanor as you conclude, leave the lectern, and return to your seat, still exuding confidence. If you talk with audience members at the end of the program, don't share with them all the little things that went wrong or demean your presentation in any way. If there were elements of your presentation that you wish had gone better, resolve to work harder on those aspects of your presentation for the next speech. For now, accept graciously any compliments listeners may offer and be ready to answer questions they may have. Chapter 9. Sharpen your delivery. If the first thing the audience notices and responds to is the speaker's appearance, the second thing is the speaker's delivery. A speaker who is easy to listen to can attract and maintain listeners' attention. It is a bit like the chicken and egg dilemma, as through the centuries rhetoricians have debated which is the more important, the speech content or its delivery. Without good delivery, the message gets lost, but without meaningful content, there is no message. But there is little doubt that a speaker with good delivery skills has a much better chance of focusing and maintaining audience attention on the message than does the speaker with poor delivery. 85. Speak clearly. Strive for clear diction and the correct pronunciation of every word you utter. With clear diction and proper pronunciation, your message will be more easily understood by listeners. You, the speaker, will be perceived as more credible and powerful. Diction is the production of sounds. Diction may be sloppy and slovenly, or crisp and professional. Sloppy diction is exhibited when someone drops the ing sounds at the end of words, such as saying goin' rather than going, or when one doesn't clearly articulate, such as saying Atlanta rather than Atlanta. Sloppy diction creates the impression that the speaker is of a lower level of education, social standing, and position, and hence lowers his credibility in the minds of the listeners. Pronunciation is how you deliver words, where the accent falls, as well as the pronunciation of sounds. Some elements of pronunciation vary with geographical region. In parts of New England, idea becomes idear, or car sounds like ka. Know that as you move from one geographical area to another, your speech patterns may be distracting to an audience, or may actually diminish or enhance your credibility. Correct pronunciation means checking the pronunciation of any unfamiliar words, including the names of any places or persons. The wrong pronunciation will make you appear less knowledgeable and informed, and at worst may actually offend listeners. Enhance your polish and professional demeanor. Make a habit of using clear diction in your day-to-day communication, and you will carry it automatically into your public speaking. Be sure you know the correct pronunciation, and you will be perceived as a more credible and more powerful speaker. 86. Vary your pace. Do you have a tendency to speak at one rate throughout your entire speech? When you feel nervous, do you speak rapidly? Do you speak so slowly that people want to finish your sentences for you? Your pace is the rate, how rapidly or slowly, at which you articulate words. Ideally, your speaking rate should be comfortable for your listeners. Too fast, and it is difficult for your listeners to follow your message. It's hard work to keep up with a speaker whose pace is too rapid, and after working at following your meaning for a while, many listeners will begin to daydream. Slow the pace too much, and a speech becomes deadly dull, and you also lose your listeners. To find out if your pace is a comfortable one for listeners, ask a couple of people to listen to you rehearse and ask for honest feedback from them. Alternatively, listen to the tape of your practice session. Strive for a comfortable pace for your listeners, but vary the pace a bit if your speech is a long one. You can slow a bit to emphasize a point, and then pick it back up to that comfortable listening rate. Varying your pace will help keep listeners focused on your message. 87. Pause often. Don't be afraid of silent pauses. Silent pauses give you, the speaker, a chance to collect your thoughts, both before you begin your speech and throughout your delivery. Silent pauses provide an opportunity for your audience to listen better, to keep up with your message, and to process the message. Silent pauses should be used after questions are posed to the audience. They give the listeners time to respond to themselves. Pauses can be used as a transition between points, and are an aid when the speaker wishes to provide emphasis for a point. Silent pauses can actually build expectation on the part of the listeners. The speaker needs pauses. Pauses provide an opportunity for the speaker to consider what he will say next, as well as a chance to breathe. The listeners need pauses. Many inexperienced speakers talk too fast and don't pause often enough for the audience to listen comfortably. If a too rapid speaking rate is combined with a lack of pauses, the problem for listeners is intensified. Listeners need pauses, or listening becomes hard work. If one tires of working so hard at listening, they will just tune the speaker out. 88. Limit use of vocalized pauses and fillers. Just as silent pauses are your friend, vocalized pauses are your enemy. A vocalized pause is space the speaker fills with or A filler refers to filling space with like or you know. Most of us will occasionally use a vocalized pause or a filler. An occasional vocalized pause in an extemporaneous speech is not a problem. It becomes a problem for a speaker when he does it with such frequency that it calls attention to itself. Once listeners become focused on the vocalized pauses, they've lost sight of the message. I have heard speakers make such frequent use of vocalized pauses that audience members started keeping track by making marks on a piece of paper each time the speaker said another With audience attention focused on how many times the speaker would say, and the message received scant attention. So how do you know if you sprinkle your speech with too many vocalized pauses? How do you limit their use if you do find you use more than your share of vocalized pauses? First, listen to either a video or audio-recorded tape of your practice speech. You should be able to hear if you excessively engage in vocalized pauses. Second, ask others to listen to the tape as well. If their assessment is that you could improve your delivery by limiting your use of vocalized pauses and fillers, then try the behavioral modification steps that follow. 1. You identify a behavior you wish to change. In this case, you want to limit vocalized pauses. 2. You make a commitment to yourself to change the behavior. If you are really committed to the change, this process will work for you. But you have to want to change. Just the fact that someone else wants you to change is not enough. 3. You must become aware that you have engaged in the behavior each time you've done it. This happens after the fact, but nonetheless you must be aware you have done it again. You may wish to enlist the aid of another person to let you know you've done it, perhaps a friend at the office and a spouse at home. This person should gently remind you that you have just said again, or whatever the thing is you are doing and wish to change. 4. As time goes by, you will be aware of what you are saying as you are doing it. Because you become aware in the midst of saying it, you will not be able to modify it at this point, but your awareness of the behavior is coming about earlier in your speaking. 5. As more time goes by, you will be aware you are about to say the thing you want to change. At this point, with the earlier awareness, you can modify what you are about to do. For example, pause with silence rather than filling the pause with sound. 6. With more time, the new behavior will have replaced the old and will come as naturally to you as the initial behavior did at one time. You will no longer have to think about what you're doing. It will now be your normal behavior, both in one-on-one situations and public speaking. I have seen these behavior modification steps work wonders with many speakers, allowing them to limit their use of vocalized pauses in both one-to-one and public speaking settings. This method is successful at modifying behaviors because the behavior can be worked on in settings where interactions take place on a daily basis. Talking with coworkers at the office, or interacting with a small group of friends at lunch. Individuals who use excessive vocalized pauses when delivering speeches also use excessive vocalized pauses as they interact with others on a daily basis. Hence, if a behavior can be modified in daily interactions, it will carry over to the public speaking setting. Effective speakers make frequent use of silent pauses, but limit their use of vocalized pauses. 89. Vary your inflection. The opposite of a speaker with a variety of vocal inflection is one that speaks in a monotone. A presentation delivered in a monotone is flat and uninteresting to listen to. Variety of vocal inflection makes a delivery easier on the audience and results in better attention and understanding. Because a variety of inflection is one component of a dynamic delivery, a variety of inflection will help the speaker be perceived as being more dynamic. This, in turn, enhances the speaker's credibility. 90. Look at everyone frequently. We all know that good eye contact is important for speakers to achieve and maintain. So important, in fact, that you have probably heard people suggest ploys for speakers to use to trick listeners into thinking the speaker is looking at them. A well-intentioned person may tell a novice speaker to look just above the heads of the audience, and the listeners will think the speaker is looking at them. Reject this and all similar advice. To begin with, in all but a large auditorium setting with house lights down and a well-lighted stage, the audience will know immediately if you are looking over their heads rather than at them. You won't fool anyone. Look at your listeners as individuals. After all, that is what they are, rather than as one large aggregate. Let your eyes sweep the room slowly. Let your eyes stop from time to time on various individuals until your eyes actually lock with theirs. Then continue repeating this process until you have connected with more of the listeners. With a small audience of 25 to 30 people, you should be able to make this contact at least once with each member of the audience. With a very large audience, connect with as many of the listeners as you can. You're establishing a bond with your listeners, and they feel you relating directly to each of them. Through your eye contact, your listeners will find it easier to pay attention to your message because they have a connection with the messenger. Your listeners will be more receptive to your persuasive appeals because you've related to them as individuals. You'll be able to note and assess the nonverbal messages from your listeners and adapt your message to what you believe they need. Engage your listeners by establishing frequent eye contact with as many of them as possible. 91. Use movement to maintain attention. 5 pictures are hanging on the wall. One falls. Which has your attention? Movement is an attention getter. Some movement from one spot to another will help keep the attention of your listeners. It takes a bit of self-confidence before most speakers are willing to move out from behind the lectern or podium. But if you are giving an extemporaneous speech and you are familiar with the material, you should be able to move around a bit. Your movement from one place to another provides action and gives the audience something to follow. It can help you engage your listeners as you walk around to the side or to the front of the lectern. In so doing, you have come out from behind the barrier, and you become psychologically as well as physically closer to your listeners. Your movement can also help you emphasize a point. Move to a point on stage, stop, pause verbally, look intently at your audience, and then make your statement with great emphasis in your voice. All these elements, verbal and nonverbal, work together to emphasize your point, but it was the movement to a spot and then stopping and standing still that initially got listeners' attention. Even positive things, if overdone, can become negatives. We have all seen the pacer pacing back and forth continually like a caged animal. The continual movement soon becomes a distraction and interferes with the listener's attention to and comprehension of the message. The key to the positive use of movement is to change. After moving a bit, stand still. When you've been standing still for a while, move again. Effective speakers know that judicious use of movement will help them capture and maintain listeners' attention, as well as display their confidence. 92. Use natural gestures to generate interest. Some individuals naturally use gestures with greater frequency than others, but most everyone does use gestures to some extent in everyday conversation. However, some people freeze and hold their bodies stiff in a public speaking situation. We have all observed the speaker who stands at the podium in a rigid stance, the toy soldier stance. Gestures aid a speaker in several ways. The use of gestures help the speaker keep the attention of the audience and generate interest in the speaker's message. Certain gestures can help the speaker clarify the message as he outlines a shape, demonstrates the magnitude, or signals his exasperation with his hands. Gestures can even be an aid to persuasion, as the speaker adds emphasis or intensity of feeling with his gestures. Who can forget the picture of Nikita Khrushchev pounding his shoe on the podium as he spoke to the United Nations? Besides the verbal messages that are complemented, clarified, or intensified by the use of appropriate gestures, an added benefit is that the speaker appears and actually feels more at ease with the use of gestures. The nonverbal message to the audience is one of competence and authority. 93. Talk with your listeners, not at them. Orators of yore spoke at people in a bombastic, elevated fashion. They most often talked at their listeners. Today's speakers, those who are both good and effective, talk with their listeners rather than at them. They see their audience and engage them as individuals. Their speeches don't sound memorized, nor do they sound as if they are read from manuscripts. The speaker conveys that he is sincere and truly concerned with each listener. How does a speaker convey his concern and talk with his listeners? It is primarily conveyed in nonverbal behaviors. The speaker who talks with his listeners uses body language and paralanguage that says, "I care about this message. I care about you. This message is an important one for you." This is conveyed primarily through eye contact, through tone of voice, and through body language. Listeners give greater credence to nonverbal messages than to verbal ones. We know people can say anything that may be convenient for them, but we believe it is more difficult to fake the messages that are conveyed nonverbally. Believe in what you speak about and allow that conviction to show in your delivery. 94. Hide your errors. One of the differences between a novice and a pro is that if the novice makes a blunder, it is obvious to the entire audience. How? It is usually written all over the speaker's face, often with a terrified, overdone grimace. This may be further emphasized with body language. The hunched movement of the shoulders coupled with the downward motion of the head that says, "Oops, I goofed." The speaker may also indicate with a verbal apology that he has committed an error. The pro, on the other hand, realizes that if he just continues as if nothing unplanned has happened, most listeners will be blissfully unaware of whatever mistake has taken place. So his enthusiastic facial expression does not change, except for whatever is appropriate to the message at the moment. His body language continues to say, "I am in control. What I have to say is important for you." Unless he has committed a verbal faux pas that must be rectified in order for the information to be correct, he will continue on as if nothing has happened out of the ordinary. If he misspoke and must correct himself, he will do it in a matter-of-fact way, keeping all his nonverbal cues professional and in control. 95. Leave playthings at your seat. A nervous speaker will often play with anything he can get his hands on and never be aware he's doing it. The best rule is, don't take anything up to the front of the room unless you are using it for your presentation. In most cases, your notes will be all you will use. Leave that pen at your seat, and you will not aimlessly take the cap on and off or click the retractable point in and out as you speak. Men, take those coins and keys out of your pants pocket before you speak, and you won't be constantly making jangling sounds as your nervous hands play with whatever's in your pocket. Women, refrain from wearing jangling jewelry that can be both an audio and a visual distraction. A word about 2 things you most likely will always have with you and cannot leave at your chair. Your hands. Although they can be a real plus as your gestures complement your message and help maintain listener attention, your hands can also distract your listeners or focus their attention on the wrong things. Except for gestures, try to keep your hands at or below your waist. A speaker who continually pushes at a wisp of hair, frequently scratches his nose, or adjusts articles of clothing engages in hand motions that will distract the listener from concentrating on the message. 96. Use a microphone effectively, but use it sparingly. Why use a microphone sparingly? Because so many things can and do go wrong. It doesn't work properly. It cuts on and off. It squeals its ugly feedback at you and the audience. It either keeps you riveted behind the podium because it is stationary, or the cord trips you as you try to move around with older microphones. So don't use a microphone just because it is there. When you conducted your analysis of the situation, You found out about the room where you would be speaking. So you should already know whether you will need to use a microphone. If so, you want to check the microphone ahead of when you present your speech, both to catch any problems with the particular mic, as well as learn how to use this one. Start by speaking into the mic. Try about 4 to 6 inches away from the mic. Then try about 12 inches from the mic. Your best distance from the mic will probably be somewhere between these 2 points. You may find that at 10 to 12 inches from the mic, it doesn't pick up your voice. You need to know where the mic cuts out. Don't just say a meaningless phrase, such as testing 1, 2, 3. That will not give you a test of your speaking volume when you speak with intensity, as you will when you actually present your speech. Go through a bit of your speech so that your actual speaking volume can be checked. Turn your head as if speaking to various members of the audience in different parts of the room. See whether the mic picks up equally well from these other angles. If possible, have someone sit near the back of the room and listen to whether you can be heard clearly. If you're using a mic, you still want to project your voice. Part of your energy, part of your credibility comes from the dynamism that projection provides to your delivery. Don't give this up and speak softly because you think the microphone will carry your voice. So project as you will in your speech as you practice using the microphone. Know how to raise and lower the mic if this applies to the microphone you'll be using. You don't want to fumble with it as you begin your speech. Remember that first impression. And it adds nothing to your credibility if you have to lean over or stand on your tiptoes throughout your speech. Know how to turn the mic on and off, and if it creates problems and becomes a distraction, turn it off. Turn your head if you have to cough. Try not to cough into the mic. And it goes without saying, don't say anything near a microphone you wouldn't want everyone to hear. We can all remember noted people who have been embarrassed to find that some private comment has just been broadcast. Learn to project your voice rather than use a microphone as a crutch, and if you do not need the microphone, don't use it. If the situation warrants the use of a microphone, hopefully you'll have a state-of-the-art, voice-activated, cordless remote unit that will enhance rather than detract from your presentation. Use it effectively. Chapter 10. Respond to your audience. Many years ago, as part of an assignment for a graduate class in rhetorical criticism, I selected a series of speeches delivered by Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. to analyze. The Canadian Broadcasting Corporation sponsored the Massey Lectures annually and selected a noted speaker to present the series each year. Dr. King had been the speaker the previous year. The CBC made recordings of the speeches available to me. As I listened to the first 4 speeches, the delivery was the familiar one of Dr. King, but when I listened to the 5th and final recording, my initial reaction was that someone must have put the wrong recording in the jacket. It did not sound at all like Dr. King's dynamic delivery. It was flat, it was dull, it was lifeless. A few days later, I talked with Judith Somerville of the CBC and mentioned to her how very different the delivery was for the 5th of Dr. King's speeches. "That's interesting," she said. "When the first 4 speeches were taped, Dr. King had a live audience. For the 5th speech, there was no live audience. The final speech was taped in a sound studio with only a microphone and a technician present." Dr. King was used to talking to live audiences. He responded to their feedback. Their responses energized his delivery. The audience will energize you as well if you will establish that eye contact, connect with them, and let them connect with you. 97. Communicate your enthusiasm as well as your ideas. Use audience feedback. Connect with your listeners. Not only will you engage them, but they will energize your delivery as well. If you're speaking to a group of listeners you do not know, try to arrive at the event early. Talk to a few people if you can before the program begins. This way, you'll have a few friendly faces to look at as you start your presentation. As you continue your speech, try to connect with other members of the audience. Eye contact is much more than looking up from one's notes and looking out at the audience. It is an attempt to connect with your listeners and engage them with you and your message. As you speak, you will probably identify a few people who are particularly expressive. They engage in a lot of positive nonverbal feedback. They smile, they nod their heads in agreement, behaviors that make you feel good. Communicate with them and use their positive responses to re-energize you. Look beyond these expressive people and try to engage additional members of your audience by connecting to their gaze and sharing your enthusiasm with them. Most will respond, and you will have widened your pool of responsive listeners. If you feel your energy wane, go back and connect again with a listener who is part of your first group of friendly faces. In every audience, there will be a few people who seem unresponsive. They sit with little or no expression on their faces. These are the faces that strike terror into the hearts of all but the boldest speakers. Why? Because we tend to view a lack of expression as a negative expression. We look at that listener with the expressionless face and assume that he's bored or uninterested. However, after the speech, the person with little expression may be the one who comes up to tell you how much he enjoyed your speech. So try not to let the lack of expression from some listeners get you down. Try to engage that person. Then look back at one of your friendly faces to buoy you up again. 98. Be yourself, your best self. You may hear an outstanding speaker and think, I wish I could speak as effortlessly and well as she does. Know that few, if any, great speakers achieve the result without effort. A seemingly effortless speech is usually the product of many hours of thoughtful preparation and practice. With preparation and practice, you too can appear to speak effortlessly. Be your best self, but be yourself. Don't try to copy someone else's speaking style. We are each unique. Speak about things that are important to you, things you believe in. Speak from your heart, and your conviction should be apparent. Practice to be the best you can be, but not to emulate someone else. Chapter 11. And in conclusion, 99. Keep a file of stories and quotations. Some of those speakers that you envy so much have a secret. They keep a file of stories or quotations that they think they might be able to use sometime in a speech. Every time they hear or read something they might be able to use, they write it down or clip it out and put it in their file. They scan through the file from time to time so that they remain familiar with what it contains. When they need a great way to begin or end a speech, or an example as support for one of their main points, they go to their file. How do they know what stories they will need for speeches they may give in the future? They don't. But they can anticipate many of the kinds of topics they may be asked to present. You can anticipate too. And if you save a clipping you never use, no harm is done. It is always better to have too much material rather than too little. 100. Seek and accept opportunities to speak. Nervous about getting up to speak to an audience, many people avoid speaking situations whenever possible, or decline invitations to present a speech. This only perpetuates the fear and doesn't give one the opportunity to grow as a speaker. The two things that will be most helpful to a speaker who wishes to combat nervousness are, first, to be thoroughly prepared for each speech one presents, and second, to gain the experience of giving many speeches. With each successful presentation, the speaker gains experience and confidence. So seek opportunities and accept invitations to speak. Each speaking situation is an opportunity for you to grow as a speechmaker. As you gain experience, you will gain confidence, and you will better be able to handle yourself in front of an audience. 101. Practice makes perfect. an adage gone wrong. You have all heard the adage, practice makes perfect. Like so many things, if we hear it often enough, we tend to believe it. But in this case, the adage is wrong. The truth is, practice makes permanent. Practice tends to reinforce a behavior, but practice by itself does not correct inappropriate behaviors. To judge whether we are reinforcing good or bad behaviors, it is useful to have honest feedback from people with expertise in the area being judged. You may enroll in a public speaking class or seminar to review the basics, polish your speaking skills, and receive useful criticism. But chances are you will need to continue to present speeches over a period of several weeks or months in order to gain the experience and confidence that will help you lessen the symptoms of nervousness, those darn butterflies or the wobbly knees. Consider joining one of the many Toastmasters groups that are in communities across the country. Toastmasters, which is comprised of both men and women, provides a non-threatening opportunity to gain experience presenting speeches, and you will receive feedback from members as well. You can locate the Toastmasters groups in your area by checking their website at www.toastmasters.com or call 714-857-8255. Practice these 101 secrets, and you can construct a good speech as well as formulate an effective speech. Sharpen your delivery and present your speech with dynamism, and you can be a successful, effective speaker. Develop your speaking skills, and you develop the power to communicate your ideas and your enthusiasm to promote yourself, your business, and your passions. You can achieve the power to present your ideas clearly, dynamically, and convincingly, whatever the situation. This is real power. This is the power of an effective speaker, and this power is yours to develop and use. Daniel Webster once said, "If all my talents and powers were to be taken from me by some inscrutable providence, and I had my choice of keeping but one, I would unhesitatingly ask to be allowed to keep the power of speaking, for through it I would quickly recover all the rest." We hope you enjoyed listening to 101 Secrets of Highly Effective Speakers. This has been a Listen and Live audio production. To receive a complete catalog of other fine audiobooks, please call 1-800-653-9400. If you enjoyed this audiobook, don't miss our latest release, the 250 job interview questions you'll most likely be asked, and the answers that will get you hired.
Too many job seekers jump right into a full-scale job search without much advanced preparation other than putting together a resume. A serious mistake. Although your resume may get you job interviews, to win job offers, you must prepare yourself further. There are 12 types of information recruiters seek in a typical job interview. Knowing what these points are and being able to discuss readily how each point relates to you will make you better prepared and more in control of the interviewing process. Think of your 12 themes as sales messages. Each is designed to showcase your best skills and qualifications. Together, they make up a 12-point strategy that will enable you to sell your qualifications in virtually any interview situation.